So I have a TD Ameritrade
I'm glad
account,
to see
a trade account, and an ally account.
Both those quarterbacks are season. You're going to see those guys again. Both of them.
I grew my ally account in October. It was
Good evening.
$19.
I'd like to call to order the regular commission meeting for the City of St. Augustine Beach for Monday, February 3rd, 2020. Would you all rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, all. Would the city clerk call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor England,
Here?
Vice Mayor Costa,
Here.
Commissioner Dewar. Here. Commissioner Runwell,
Here.
and Commissioner Samora.
Next item is approval of minutes from the regular commission meeting on January 6th, special commission meeting January 13th, and continuation meeting from January 14th. Is there any changes?
Yes, Mayor, I do have a couple of changes.
Okay,
Let's see, on page 4 of the minutes from the regular meeting, there's a reference to the number of parking spaces per room in regards to the Embassy Suites, and the number in the minutes is 1.5. I believe that should reflect 1.15 per code. Okay, I wanted to make sure that got corrected. There's reference to a couple of exhibits. Are those included? I didn't see them.
They are actually included in the file, but they're not showing, I didn't send them to you.
Okay. I guess for the future, could you please include those so that we have those also? Thank you. And on page 8, there's that same reference to the number of parking spaces. There was page 13, halfway down, in regards to the motion. It says moved by Commissioner Samora, seconded by Commissioner Rumrell, and then it says motion passed unanimously, but then there's a roll call vote after that. So it's on page 13. And I'm not seeing the other one. There was kind of a funny one where it said that in regards to sending out communications that I recommended or said something about, it was supposed to say email blasts, but it said head blasts. And I wanted to make sure people knew that I didn't recommend head blasting anyone, so maybe we can find that. But with those changes, if there's any others, I'll make a motion to approve of those changes.
any other changes? We have a motion, need a second?
Second. With the, subject to the proposed amendments.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No. All right. Going further. Additions or deletions to the agenda? Any changes tonight?
Two deletions, Mayor. First one on the presentations, item A, Ms. Wilson's gotten more assignments on her work, and she's unable at this time to have the time to be the member of the board, so she's withdrawn her application. And item number 11, the building official asked that you take that off for if he wants to do further review on the permit fees. And we misspelled fees. We said
All right.
fuss. Those are the only changes I have.
All right. So then, go to the next item under presentations.
Can I change that one too? Since I don't know that we're going to a second meeting tomorrow or not, can we move that to the end of the agenda? I don't know that it needs to be on the first part of the agenda, since I'll be here for the whole meeting anyway. When Max first put this on the agenda, it was assuming that I'd be leaving here immediately after that was done and I was gone, but that's not the way it's working this time.
Sure.
Because the law firm
Okay.
will not be here tonight, I understand.
So-
So put that at the end of the agenda, for whenever that is, be it today or tomorrow, whenever we're done.
Okay. All right.
And that's which one? The
Item
B.
B.
presentation.
Under
7B.
7B. Okay. So we will move to public comments. Let me welcome everyone first and explain that the public is encouraged to speak out. There are 2 different times you're allowed to speak, once for public comments and second on agenda items. The time limit for public comments is 3 minutes. The agenda items is 2 minutes. And we invite you to speak. We welcome your comments. We ask that you keep your comments focused on the item, if it's an agenda item, and please be civil. We will not be able to address everything you say directly, but if there is an issue that needs to be researched by the city staff, we'll be glad to do that. And at that, I will open the floor for public comments, starting on the right side over here. Anyone wish to speak?
Ann Palmquist, 213 10th Street. We're not allowed to speak if it's on the agenda, correct?
Correct.
On that item.
You can speak at that time.
At that time, yes, I meant now. First off, to congratulate you guys who survived the first month. You've only got 11 more to go, and good listening skills, I hope. The idea of having participation has always been Fairmont, and absolutely at the necessity for our community. We're so small, we can't help but run into each other if we go to the library or Publix or any place, and I think that's a good thing. However, when you limit the broadcast to a YouTube or some other means other than direct live broadcast, you limit the access of people's ability to find out what's going on. One, they may or may not have the facility to do it, the equipment or the contacts with it. They may not be available as far as understanding how to set it up, and you are limiting it, and just to say it's too expensive seems like a lame reason for not having more public involvement in your community. I do know that when you have certain issues, you have people show up because they know their neighbors, they know each other, and they want to take part. And I would suggest that this commission seriously look at the budget item to put it back on the issue as far as simultaneous contact broadcast while the meeting is in progress. The YouTube system is not sufficient for the reasons I stated. I appreciate your consideration.
Anyone else from the right side? How about in the middle of the room? Mr. Slavin, good evening.
Good evening. Ann Palmquist is absolutely right. I totally agree.
Could you please state your name and address for the record, please?
How quickly they forget. Ed Slavin, Box 3084, cleanupcityofstaugustine.blogspot.com. My friend Ann Palmquist is absolutely right. When Mr. Royal did away with it, it was done sneakily late at night, and his excuse was, oh, there's not that many people that watch it. Our democracy is under attack, folks, and we need to protect and defend it. You swore an oath to that effect every single time you were elected. I want to shift gears here, and I want to thank and praise the chairman, the chair and the vice chair of the Planning and Zoning Board, Ms. West and Ms. Sloan, for their courage under fire in resigning and saying why. Resignations under protest are very rare in the American system, much more common in Great Britain. You need to hear from them in a public exit interview at your earliest convenience, to hear from the 2 PCB members who quit because, well, they've been mistreated by the city staff. Again, and Mr. Royal, who's not even looking up, is a sexist and a misogynist, and there's some city staff people who condescended to Ms. West, who's a very talented environmental lawyer, and Ms. Sloan. I also want to thank the Planning and Zoning Board. We'll get to item 1 in a minute. I wanted to praise them, though, for their unanimous decision on that, and we'll get to item 1. But I had occasion to be in South Florida recently in Pompano Beach, and I saw some of the things there that y'all have prevented here, and I just wanted to sing your praises for that. There's no passport parking app in St. Augustine Beach. Thank you for rejecting that stupid idea. There's no high-rises except for that dumb old Embassy Suites. I want to thank you for holding the line on those. Tonight, you're going to do an ordinance blocking those ridiculous scooters, those dangerous scooters. Don't have those. And we don't have ads on bus shelters. The cartelist absolutely wanted you to amend your sign code to allow it and went sniveling off into the night. But we can do a lot better with our local government here. We need accountability from stem to stern, starting with an inspector general countywide over every single government entity in St. Johns County, including the 2 cities and the special taxing districts. We need an ombudsman, someone to speak out for people. Because there's so many people that come to a meeting and they don't know what to do. And they don't have anybody to speak for them. And they can't afford a lawyer. And we need to have institutional protections in St. Johns County. And the proof of that is tomorrow they're going to select Hunter Conrad as the county administrator without advertising, without posting, without any compliance with federal EEO laws. And it's a done deal. It's probably going to go down 5-0. And I was the only person to speak out against it. And I was the only person to call for Mr. Wanchik's firing, and he was a sexist misogynist too. But Mr. Royal, your city manager, needs to be fired. He needs to go. And the way he mishandled sexual harassment by Gary Larson deserves a book. Thank you.
Anyone else from the middle of the room? Good evening.
Hi, Nick Binder, 232 Big Magnolia Court, St. Augustine Beach, Florida. 3 things. 1, thank you for moving on the lighting for State A1A, and hopefully the issues are resolved for Beach Boulevard. 2nd, it's getting to swim season, and at the end of Ocean Hammock Park, we've had lifeguard stands in the past. Last year it was moved well down the beach. I would encourage dialogue with the county to get a lifeguard stand at Ocean Hammock Park. That is something that you have 22 parking spaces, you have residents that walk there, you have some hotels in the area. There is one up in Guy Harvey, which was fine. A number of years ago, I fought for one in that area of Ocean Hammock Park because the other spread was down at Ocean Trace. It was 2 miles between each one. They did put one at Ocean Hammock, but then they moved it down further towards Sea Colony. So I would encourage the beach to talk to beach services to see if they can relocate it closer to Ocean Hammock Park. 3rd, a few months ago we talked about Anastasia Dunes. We talked about you allowing Anastasia Dunes homes to go to a higher percentage for impervious building. This present reports you had requests to take a tree down in the middle of 2 lots. The 2 lots are lots 46 and 47. The lots, when they're combined, and it's a bad lot, that's why they were combined by Anastasia Dunes. It's 23,000 square feet. Their intent is to put a 6,000 square foot single-family home, which is fine. They plan on building basketball courts, pools, outdoor grilling areas, jacuzzis, for maybe another 5,000 square feet. They have to raise the level there probably 5 to 10 feet to do this. That could cause a flooding issue for any of the surrounding homes in that area, both in Whispering Oaks and east of the lot 46 and 47. All I would do is encourage your building department and your professional engineer to look carefully at the flow of any stormwater from that property when it's being planned, because you could have a problem since there is no outlet for any of the water in the southern part of Anastasia Dunes. It was supposed to be put in when it was built. It wasn't put in. I think if you look back at the plans back 20 years ago, you may find a 6-inch directional bore. That's what your prior building official had indicated to me. It was never put in. So I would just encourage you, as you move ahead, looking at that lot sequence to make sure that you don't cause any flooding for any of the surrounding communities. Thank you.
Anyone else from the middle section?
I'm John Leslie, 205 Bluebird Lane, St. Augustine Beach, 32080. I'm the president of the Vietnam Veterans of America, Leo C. Chase, Chapter 1084 of St. Johns County. And we're a not-for-profit Florida corporation, and we operated the beer and wine concession at the Beach Blastoff into 2020. I wish to take this opportunity to express my appreciation and extend my heartfelt thank you to the city of St. Augustine Beach and to the cadre of dedicated men and women under your charge who made the beach blast-off such a success as it was for the city and for our veterans. Every aspect of our interface in working with the city administration department, public works crew, St. Augustine Beach Police Department, and other supporting law enforcement and first responders was outstanding in every aspect. Our questions were answered without delay. Our requests for support were likewise met in a positive and rapid manner. The beach blast-off was as well planned and executed as any of the many large-scale events I've experienced, whether that be as a participant or as a planner. I was particularly impressed with the work, support, and leadership provided by Max Royal, Cindy Walker, Kenny Katchel, Tom Large, Chief Robert Hardwick, and Fire Marshal Ron Dowling. They and their staffs made it go off so well. Even though they're not directly affiliated with the city, I also want to commend the service provided to us by 3 security agents we hired from Central Security of St. Augustine. They provided invaluable assistance and security to our operation, complementing the city and county law enforcement. And I look forward to continuing partnership with the city of St. Augustine Beach again next year for Beach Blast-Off. Last year, when I read a similar letter, there were some participants in the audience that were dismayed that veterans would be selling beer. I want to let you know that with this fundraiser, along with others we've been able to donate over $25,000 to some of the things we do. Disaster relief, Panhandle, Keys, Puerto Rico, Texas, Vets for Vets, Veterans Treatment Court, 7th Judicial Circuit, Veterans in the Classroom, St. Johns County School District, Cecil Field POW MIA Memorial and Museum, Homeless Stand Down, Kids Safe Zone, Mission to End Student Homelessness, Home Again St. John's, St. Gerard Campus, St. John's Housing Partnership, Boy Scouts of America, Toys for Tots, and participation in the County Memorial Day and Veteran Day ceremonies and other needy organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie, so much. Anyone else from the middle? All right, to the left of the room over here. Anyone want to speak up?
Is there an expert? I need an overhead expert. There we go.
Mr. Thompson, name and address?
Craig Thompson, number 60 Street. I appreciate the remarks that were made by the other speakers. I support many of those remarks. It's difficult coming out here and speaking, and I'm glad you all allow time and people are willing to do it. I came to speak about 2 pretty alarming issues that happened this last month. They are the resignation of the chairman and vice chairman of the PCB and the taking a stand away from the dunes at number 2 12th Street. I've researched these items, and I would like my comments and documents to be part of the record. First, the letter of resignation by 2 of our most experienced and knowledgeable zoning board members cited both professional and personal concerns with the building official actions. I've relayed similar experiences and frustrations to the city manager in the past. In meeting with the mayor and the city manager, we discussed various remedies. I hope you consider seriously the recommendations of Jane West and myself in rectifying this staffing situation. First of all, Jane West, from her letter, we both strongly recommend the city take immediate actions to curb this behavior so that you can continue to attract intelligent, dedicated volunteers for your boards. We also suggest you implement steps to make sure volunteer boards' recommendations are communicated consistently and accurately. And finally, we suggest the city hire a part-time professional planner to counterbalance the current power structure that appears to have lost sight of the city's sense of place and vision. It has been an honor to serve our city, and we both wish you the best in caring for our natural and human resources. That was the last paragraph of her page. I wrote something similar, asking that the city manager could designate a deputy director of planning and zoning, either from within the current staff or hiring outside consultant, as a means of separating planning duties from those of the building department and the building official. This designee would be responsible for presenting at PZB and CPAC meetings concerning land development regulations and comprehensive plan policies. The other item I wanted to discuss was the removal of sand from the dune at 2D Street. This was a letter dated in March 2019 authorizing the removal, and there was 3 reasons given in that, but there are a lot of questions like why was this private property allowed to take public sand from the dunes and use it as fill to raise his yard 3 or 4 feet? If it was okay for that property owner, then why isn't it okay for his neighbors who are now subject to more flooding risk? Why wasn't it properly reviewed by a qualified planner? If the zoning officials don't have the expertise, why wasn't Jane West, chairman of the Planning and Zoning Board, consulted? Why weren't the regulations of Land Development Code 5.03.01 used to deny the request? I do have handouts, if you don't mind.
Will there be enough, Craig? I can make more.
Max, if you'll just make sure that the commissioners get copies in their
Yeah.
mailbox, we'll do that. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Anyone else from the left side? All right, then I will close the public comment and open commissioners' comments. So, Mr. Samora.
You can stay here. I have none at this time.
I just have one quick one to Mr. Bender's comment about Ocean Hammock, the lifeguards. I've already talked to Commander Ashlock about that, and Commander, I don't know if you have a little update. I think there's a beaches meeting coming up here soon.
Yes, Commissioner, there's a meeting next Thursday with beach services in preparation for the upcoming beach season, where we'll address that with Marine Rescue, pending their manning, so we'll bring that up.
I've got a couple of items I want to mention. On January 22nd, the city manager and I met with the St. Augustine mayor, Tracy Upchurch, and with John Reagan, the city manager, and it was a very formal, just meet each other, very informal meeting, and we have agreed that we will try to stay in touch and work together on sustainability, flooding issues, sea level rise, things like that. And then on January 24th, Mr. Thompson made reference to this. The city manager and I met with Craig Thompson and Dr. Sandy Bond, and I believe you all got an email on that meeting describing what occurred and what actions we're taking. But it was pretty much in line with Mr. Thompson's remarks tonight.
Mayor,
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 yes.
are we going to have further discussion about those issues at the workshop with the planning board?
Yes, we can, and I think tomorrow, Max will send out a draft of what is going to be on that. Well, I might as well say
You mean an agenda?
an agenda for the workshop that is scheduled for February 10th with the Planning and Zoning Board. And let's see, what else? Want to bring up, I think, Commissioner, you're interested in bringing up on the agenda parking again? Is that something you?
At the workshop?
Not at the workshop, but have, the city manager has indicated to me you would like to discuss parking again? Is that, and maybe in your comments, you might be able to address.
I haven't had any conversation with the city manager about that. I don't know why he would
Okay.
say that I'm asking for it to be brought up.
Yeah.
Now, last year, I believe there was a direction that the commission gave that it be put back on the March agenda, but I have had no further discussion or
Okay.
indicated any direction since the commission as a whole gave that direction.
Okay. All right, so if we, all right, we'll just wait till we put it back on the agenda. Okay, all right, Vice Mayor, your comments.
I'm pleased to learn that you and the city manager were able to meet with the mayor and manager of St. Augustine. Max, have you been able to reach out to Hunter Conrad from the county?
Not yet. He's sort of busy at the moment getting his contract finalized and learning the ropes for his job, but I intend to meet with him.
Okay, because we could really, I think we could benefit from a joint meeting with the county commissioners, for sure. And actually, I was going to, tonight, I was going to suggest that we revisit the parking issues that we have, because although we are not going to pursue paid parking, we do have parking issues within our city that we need to discuss and see if we can formulate some plans to increase the parking or improve it, or different ideas. So I'm glad that we had that come up. Other than that, I have nothing. at
Commissioner
this time.
George, anything further?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out that I've received some information from a citizen regarding something that the city of Durham, North Carolina did. And what they did is they took a formal vote to prohibit their city, actually it might have been in the county, from engaging in any future purchases of bottled water. And it might also extend to, any of those single-use disposable plastics. So in other words, although the legislature has kind of tied our hands regarding some of our local ordinances to regulate single-use plastics, the city as an entity can say that it does not want to spend taxpayer dollars on the purchasing of these disposables which are harmful to the environment. And so I wanted to put that forward for consideration on a future agenda item. Could be a resolution. We've adopted this Go Green policy. We're encouraging local businesses to terminate the use of the single-use styrofoams and plastics, and we should be setting a standard. If we're asking them to do it, we certainly should be doing it ourselves. I believe that was rather implied when we first adopted that resolution, but I don't believe our resolution went so far as to say that the city will not engage in that purchasing itself. So I'd just like to bring that back onto the radar so we clean it up, so our messaging is consistent and that we walk our talk, okay? Also, along a similar line, we had adopted a resolution encouraging the legislature to not violate our home rule. And the gentleman who circulated that draft resolution was a Mr. Thomas Bradford. He sent out another email chain during this past month suggesting that the cities who adopted that resolution forward those with a letter from the mayor directly to the state representatives. And all of the email addresses were nicely provided, conveniently provided at the bottom of the email. I did forward that on to Max, but I just wanted to make sure all commissioners were aware and that you, Mayor, were aware, so that if you'd like to, put your ink on the signature, get it in there now while the legislature is, working. So, all right, and that's all. I just wanted to bring that to the attention. Thank you for the time.
Max, do we actually purchase and provide bottled water for staff?
No, Well, they bring their own. I've known some people bring their own. Melissa used to bring bottled water. I know Anthony upstairs in the TV
Okay,
room, he brings his own. I usually use the water fountain.
okay, all right.
For events and all, I think
Okay,
is
okay.
kind of more the
All right.
idea.
Oh, more
And-
events than at City Hall
Well,
itself?
events and staff, obviously, but across the gamut. And as an alternative to plastics, there are the boxed waters now, just same kind of boxes we used to have at school for boxed milk, but it's water, so, or, you know, paper cups with the larger containers of drinking water for those circumstances.
Okay. For those commissioners who want to talk about parking and whatever issues, you know, you want to talk about parking, please forward your thoughts to the city manager so he can get them in the agenda. Okay, all right. Anything further on commissioner comments? Okay, then we shall go to public hearings. Item number 1, allowing chickens by exception. And it's an appeal of the decision by the Comprehensive Planning and Zoning Board to allow by exception of the Land Development Code, the keeping of chickens at 313 A Street. And,
Mayor, before there's substantive discussion, I'd like to just make a comment.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I've had a conversation with our city attorney about recusing myself. It's well-known, this is a small town, it's well-known that the appellant is an employee with a law firm that I own here in the city. And I would just like to make it known that I do not necessarily share the opinions of everyone that works at my law firm. And the application or the appeal, it was not submitted either on my behalf or on the behalf of the law firm. They're the independent personal opinions and request of the appellant solely and exclusively, and I'm sure she will tell you that as well. And however, because of the work relationship, I do think that it's appropriate to not raise any questions regarding you know, any perception of bias or anything of that nature. So I am going to recuse myself. However, I will say that in my numerous years of service on this board, I have frequently had to listen to and rule on applications both made by friends or colleagues of mine and voted both in, you know, for or against. I've always strived to be very objective and to do what's in the best interest of the city as well as in the best interest of the city's residents. And in this instance, for the sake of perceptions and because of the economic entanglements, I will recuse myself. But I just want to make it clear that I'm not in any way affiliated with the application, and I wish everyone the best on this. And I'm going to step out of the room until this agenda item is done.
And for disclosure purposes, I need to disclose that
Right.
Ms. Holcomb is my attorney representing me in a legal issue pertaining to my business.
Okay.
So under disclosure, there it is.
Mr. Wilson, should we let the building manager open this item and then any remarks you want to make?
That would be fine. I can probably put this to sleep quicker. If you want Brian to testify, you can go ahead and have him do it. But I've got my own legal position on this thing, which I think y'all need to hear either before Brian speaks or after Brian speaks.
Mr. Law, if you'll briefly describe what happened and focus on what the appeal is about, what we're doing.
Yes, ma'am. This property had received a complaint about the alleged presence of chickens. So code enforcement investigated, did discover that there were some hens in the yard. And as the code up here states, keeping, breeding, or raising of poultry is prohibited use. So they applied for a variance at staff's request to go to the Planning and Zoning Board. Traditionally, there's not a mechanism. This is a prohibited use. There has to be a way to appeal a prohibited use. And I can read the definition of a variance if you'd like it in a record or not. It's public record.
It is in the record.
Okay. So they went to the Planning and Zoning Board. They denied the variance but approved the use. And I believe it was unanimous. And they did this on the off the attorney's discussion, and that was not Mr. Wilson. That was, I forget his name, but Jeremiah.
My Mulligan was in there that day.
So at that point, the Planning and Zoning Board denied the variance and approved the use, so the code enforcement proceedings stopped. So there was an appeal filed within the 30-day period to appeal the decision based on certain terms. At that point, we did the paperwork, the application fee was paid, and now I believe it's time to turn this over to the city attorney, unless there's any specific questions, because this is outside of my ability.
Any commissioner want to ask a question about how we got here? All right, Mr. Wilson.
As Brian said, I wasn't at the Planning and Zoning Board meeting. I was in Washington DC that week. But I read the minutes, and I talked to Jeremiah about it, who was present, and this appears to be one of the situations of good intentions gone sort of bad in a way, in that this wasn't really appropriate for variance, because it doesn't relate to land as variance application should. It relates to a personal matter involving a resident on this property. And it wouldn't have been appropriate to apply for variance to begin with. The variance appeal request was denied by the board as it properly should have been, but then somehow the board made a decision they were going to allow the use anyway, which goes well beyond their jurisdiction as a planning and zoning board, and really was inappropriate at the time. I could understand why it happened, because this is a very sympathetic situation, and the other side of it would be a code enforcement board action. It's a complex issue under the ADA, and I can't begin to tell you that I understand this at all, because I'm not sure where this would end up. But the alternatives that the city would have in this situation would be to change their code to allow the chickens that they feel fit, or simply not pursue a code enforcement action if the city chooses not to, because the city's not forced to take a code enforcement action even if there's a violation of the code, they're not forced to do that. This would leave it up to the parties if they wanted to have a lawsuit to allow a judge to determine whether or not this is an appropriate service animal situation, and that all depends on what the commission wants to do. I don't think we have jurisdiction at this point to do anything with this other than to set aside the Planning and Zoning Board's decision to allow it, and then let the chips fall where they may afterwards. I know that sounds like a chicken way of dealing with it, but no pun intended, but that's, to me, is the only way to handle it at this point. And that leaves us to look for other ways to resolve this issue and figure out how to resolve the problem, either at the city level or some other level if that becomes necessary. So I'll leave that to the commission as to how they wish to deal with this. But at this point, the appeal really is inappropriate, and the decision of the Planning and Zoning Board was inappropriate. They made a decision on something they don't have power to make decisions on, and that's the problem with it. But the variance isn't granted. There's no code enforcement action pending at this point that I know of, and if the commission has any better ideas about how to handle their chickens, they've come home to roost tonight somewhat, so I guess we'll see what the commission wants to do now. I'm sorry about that. I don't mean to make light of it. I understand the child's problems, and hope we can find a way to resolve this.
Well, we will take public comment on the item, but as the city attorney has, we have to keep focused on what the appeal is and what we will do on that narrow item, and then what we might be able to do with code enforcement. Okay, so we can start public comment. Vice Mayor.
Patricia Cole, please. Patricia Cole.
Does the appellant make a presentation first?
I presume I could.
I think that was procedure that Max suggested, was that the appellant, whoever that is, make their appeal or make their presentation at this point.
Okay, if the appellant would like to step forward.
Are they here?
Yes.
Gentlemen, Pamela Holcomb, 312 A Street. On behalf of myself as a resident and a neighbor of the applicant for the non-variance appellant, I would also just knowing that Commissioner George might have an ultimate authority, I was very clear that I was not going to speak to her about this, and so she has had no communication for me on any issue of substance. And I do appreciate the abundance of caution and avoiding any perception. Before we start, Mr. Wilson, just to let you know, the HUD in its infinite wisdom decided to issue 19-page guidance on this issue on January 28th.
I don't think I've seen that.
No, well, I updated my case law and I found this. So I have several copies here, Ms. Beverly. Yes, so I apologize that I haven't had a chance to fully digest it, but it supports the arguments that I've made in my written appeal. I will keep them brief. I would suggest that there is case law that says cities can and do make decisions on reasonable request for accommodation under the Fair Housing Act as to zoning. There's a case about a mini horse under the ADA and FHA. So there is some precedent, and I'd be happy to share that with you, Mr. Wilson.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There is some case law precedent about cities having authority to hear fair housing ask reasonable accommodation requests, and I'll be happy to share that precedent.
And that wasn't the appropriate time or place to do it at Planning and Zoning Board. That's the only thing. That's what the whole purpose of this was.
I understand, but I would be happy to share after this meeting that there's some case law I saw on that issue. It's helpful. You know, I'm very sympathetic to the applicant in this case. I love animals, I love children, I was a 4-H'er, I had chickens when I was a kid on a country property. And as they say, good facts make bad law, and when you make a decision based upon emotion rather than a cold hard analysis of the facts, sometimes we get things wrong. I think if this had been a grown man asking for a request for his emotional support bull, the Planning and Zoning would not have come to the decision it did. But when you have a small child, and it tears at the heartstrings. On the other hand, as a member of the Florida Bar Companion Animal Committee, I have a vested interest in, this is very unusual for me, not to be on the side of the animal and the animal owner, but to make sure that, at least to the extent I can do it in my small world, that we get the decision right. Because when the decision is wrong, it can have terrible consequences to those who do have legitimate needs. I think we all are familiar with the ever-popular emotional support peacock. Well, the DOT has just come out with guidance 2 weeks ago in January that is going to cut off all emotional support animals in planes, and it's only going to be service dogs. So when we get it wrong, it can potentially penalize the people that really need it. You know, I think Mr. Wilson's already identified there were some procedural issues with this. There was some lack of notice that didn't allow me to respond. Written, you know, my appeal addresses this. You know, I know a little bit about this issue, and, you know, the prescription from the doctor doesn't properly prescribe an emotional support animal. Commissioner Sloan identified that issue and then voted in favor of it anyway. Emotional support animals have to do things to support the person. The fact that the child is engaging in an activity that is therapeutic is a wonderful thing, and I'm glad it helps him. But that's not the purpose of an emotional support animal, which is to allow the disabled person to have equal use of the dwelling as a non-disabled person. And that gets to the sort of the heart of the issue, is that you're entitled to equal use, you're not entitled to a preferential use. And no other child in St. Augustine Beach, disabled or not, can keep chickens. And essentially, the chickens are not helping him use the dwelling. And so it's a fatally flawed application in that respect. Well, you know, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, I would thank you for your time.
Any questions? Evidently not at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we can now go to public comment.
That's correct.
Patricia Abel.
Patricia Abel, 1333 Eisenhower Drive, Presidential Gardens. If you all are aware where that's at, 3-block area, one way in, one way out. And when Oliver the pig moved in next door, I never even knew when I bought my house that farm animals were allowed there, and I love it. Anyway, that has nothing to do with this. The thing is, this is a serious situation. We're talking about a child's life. I've been a volunteer in 3 different county public school systems with children, special needs, everything. Every child counts. If you go to public schools and you're involved, this is how things go. If it's chickens that save a life or make a big difference in a needy child, then it's chickens. There's nothing wrong with that. Laws, rules can be changed, and when it comes to a child's life, like I said, we can all work with this. And all of you, even if we pass this on and go to planning and zoning, you still can help and put an input. Thank you.
If everyone would reserve their booing or clapping or whatever, it will make this procedure go so much further, so thank you.
Lila Sleeper?
Hello, I'm Lila Sleeper, and I live at 17 Ocean Woods Drive. I'm also a teacher, or I used to be a teacher. I'm now a tutor in St. Johns County, and I have worked with hundreds of children with different needs. And one of the pamphlets that I just picked up as I walked in was the Early Learning Coalition. The first thing it says, helping children. And as the young lady over here stated, all children learn and have different needs to become successful. And having a chicken and taking care of it and making a child feel good about themselves and be successful is more important than what the ordinance says right now. I think we really need to consider all the children of St. Augustine Beach and also St. Johns County when we're working with children like this. So that's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Ed Slavin?
Ed Slavin, box 3084, cleanupcityofstaugustine.blogspot.com. Your PCP got it right on the fly, and I would affirm the PCP and deny the appeal. And I would also issue directions to the city staff and the new city attorney, or the old city attorney, to work on an ordinance that would implement 28 CFR Part 35, and the decision I cited to y'all in the email, the one that the appellant referred to, involving the mini horse in the Sixth Circuit. There's a community in the state of Ohio that actually took criminal law enforcement action against a landowner whose little girl had a little horse, a mini horse. We're not about that. We're not about retaliating against people for protected activity or asserting their rights under ADA. And there's a hole in the code that needs to be filled. The city manager should have years ago implemented the HUD guidelines on the Fair Housing Act and ADA reasonable accommodations. In fact, just so y'all know, I've talked to, I think, all y'all individually. Thanks to my mentor, Nahum Litt, the former chief judge of the Labor Department, HUD now has administrative law judges to hear these cases. And if somebody were to bring an action against the city or the appellant for fair housing violations, that could be a $300,000 compensatory damage award by a HUD ALJ, which the courts and Congress agreed with us, that's not a violation of the Seventh Amendment right to jury trial. So there are very potent enforcement mechanisms. The city code did not have what it should have had, but your code enforcement board, I read the transcript, they did a very good job, and they made a decision involving both legal and moral reasoning, and I haven't heard a darn thing from the appellant to explain to me why she even filed this appeal. I am mystified. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but I think you've got what you need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Palmquist?
Ann Palmquist, 213 10th Street. I read on the code that bees are not allowed either, and they are causing no harm. We have chickens that are now and have been not allowed. And I'm wondering, as far as the emotional support, that is something between the young man and his family and their support systems as far as his condition and so forth. I think when the city gets involved in something like this, they best tread very lightly, because there are other areas that we could get involved in that are really not our purvey or our expertise, as far as medically or otherwise. We can make fun and laugh and have fun with the, I believe it was a large bird with a big tail. What was it, a pelican? No.
Peacock?
Peacock, yes. In more ways than one, it's been a source of humor. However, when we deal with certain things of individuals in a small community, we sometimes forget that the humor is not necessarily appreciated. The idea of the best thing that comes out of this is however the board and the commission decides, legal and otherwise, but how the family has seen support for their issue be directed in their favor as far as to involve the community as far as support. The commission is gifted and suggested that you uphold the community's will. And so it is not a numbers game of how many in favor and how many not, and it's not really a game of chicken soup for the soul, but it is to listen to your community and your special needs area. So I would suggest that the commission take a serious look at it, listen to the community, and see what is the best way. I think as far as we've had the issue in the past, I can name at least 4 areas where people have chickens in their home or on their property and nobody says any. And I know in the past, the commission, actually, not this sitting commission, they paid $250 per chicken to have them removed. We had wild chickens for a while. And I think that was the extreme of this situation. But the idea of having livestock is different than having the chickens.
Jennifer Waldison?
Today's been a whirlwind.
You'll state your name and address,
Jennifer
please.
Wildison, sorry. 313 A Street. So today's it's just been a crazy day. I come to you as a mom. I'm not an attorney. I don't have any fancy language to try to use here or manipulate or anything. My son has special needs of different variations, TBI, traumatic brain injury, ADHD, dyslexia, and I have so many more better things to be doing. There's so much better coverage in the news than this that my chickens in the backyard are making right now. So it's kind of crazy to me that this is even happening, but we're here, and I would not be here if it did not dramatically help my son. And I'm just asking that you see that, and I'm so humbled by the support that I'm receiving from family, friends, community, and perfect strangers that are just reaching out. I'm more than humbled, and if anything, I'm just praying and that God just uses this for something even bigger. And but most of all, that people just see the difference that it makes in his lives. There could be any kind of other argument. And I just want to read something the head of his school put out to a lot of people in the community. that she writes about Cole. She says, "There are very few things parents can do for students who are scarred with the side effects of dyslexia, anxiety, self-doubt, lack of motivation. The fact that Cole's mom found a harmless and effective solution should be celebrated. We need the community to support children with learning differences and special needs. The opposition over some chickens is very disheartening and seemingly insignificant in comparison to the big challenges Cole and others face." So, thank you. Oh.
Heather Hall.
Hi, I'm Heather Hall. I live at 312 B Street. I typed something on my phone because I knew I'd be nervous. Is it okay if I read it from here?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Unlike Mrs. Holcomb, I am a direct neighbor to Sweet Cole and his chickens. We share a fence. I'm the closest neighbor possible to Cole and his chickens. And I have witnessed firsthand the positive impact they have had on him and his family. I'd like to point out that despite our very close proximity to this family and their chickens, I can say without hesitation that they have never negatively impacted my family's quality of life. In fact, I can assure you that we wouldn't have even known they existed there had it not been for the fact that this awesome little boy befriended my 9-year-old little boy, who also has special needs. So I guess you could say the positive impact those chickens have had on Cole have extended over to my son as well. Unless you are a parent of a child with special needs, it would be difficult to understand the positive impact that something like a support animal could have on a child's life, no matter what that animal may be. For these reasons and many others, I fully support this amazing family and them keeping their chickens. Thank you for your time.
Kevin Kincaid.
Evening, Kevin Kincaid, 611th Street, St. Augustine Beach. I actually wasn't prepared to come up here and speak tonight, but I've been listening to everything that's been going on, and as a member of the Planning and Zoning Board and sat up there the night that we addressed this, I think there's some confusion. And if you look through the minutes, I'm confused looking through the minutes, actually. There was very strong and unanimous support on our board in order to provide the relief that this young man was looking for, this family was looking for. We were a little bit frustrated in that we were told that we were not allowed to consider this as a variance. It wasn't appropriate as a variance. So the eventual intent of the motion, whether or not it actually says that in the minutes, the intent of the motion was to move that on to the commission for a final decision because we were told we were not the board to handle it. There was no mechanism for our board to handle it. So whatever it is that's being communicated that we approved, we didn't have anything to approve. It wasn't. It was sent on to the commission. It was approved to send this to the commission with a strong recommendation that we find a way to work this out. It was frustrating to us that night. We believe all of our positions are to work for the citizens and the occupants here of our city and to make life a better place here. And it was frustrating that we were unable to really assist and have to send this little boy and his family on to yet another hoop or hurdle in order to accomplish what they needed done. I understand there was some discussion about the letter from the doctor, whether it was right or wrong or whatever. We understood the intent, we understood the background, and we fully supported it. So having said that, to convey the wishes of our board was to move this forward to you guys with a way to there was no ambiguity there. We wanted to move this on for you guys to make a decision because that was a proper way to do it. And we also suggested in the motion that since the family was asked to put in a variance and that was improper, that we refund their, what I consider a fairly significant variance
permit fee. So that's what I have. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and remember what we did.
I read the minutes, I don't have any questions. Anyone else?
I read the minutes, and thank you for serving on the PCB.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jorge Ortega?
Good evening. My name is George Ortega. I reside at 28 Magnolia Dunes Circle. I am retired, and I contribute a great amount of time to the Florida Wildlife Conservation, specifically to the youth hunting program and the other conservation camps in Ocala Conservation Center. Our organization believes, and I am not speaking on behalf of them, I'm speaking from my experience, what a young person obtains from being taught how to ethically treat animals, take care of them, establish their well-being, is an indelible mark that is left on them of how to treat other people. If this family has found a cure without medicines that we are so much overwhelmed by, therapy, psychology, drugs that are constantly, injected and provided to these kids with these problems, if they have found a wholesome solution that allows this child to be happy, hopefully you will approve this, and my hope is that if this is approved, hopefully the plaintiff can get a support animal to find a heart and a soul with her, for her. Thank you.
I have no other requests to speak cards.
All right. Mr. Wilson, anything more you would like to say?
Just that, obviously, Mr. Kincaid came up and spoke about what the Planning and Zoning Board was trying to do, which was try to find a way to accommodate the wishes within some sort of power. And the commission has the ability to do that if you want to change the code, impose certain regulations on things, if you wish to allow this. There is a way to resolve the issue. It just wasn't through the Planning and Zoning Board variance process, that's all. And that's what they were trying to do, is hand the ball off to the commission to make a decision about something that's a difficult decision to make, obviously, but I think the commission could probably make it in a way that wouldn't involve creating litigation. The HUD rules apply to housing that HUD regulates. We don't have any obligation to operate under that because I don't think we have any HUD housing in this area. So whatever rules they've come up with, that's to deal with public housing that HUD regulates, not cities who have their own ability to regulate laws and create their own laws to run what they want to do. So nothing that HUD has to do has anything to do with what your decision is here. You have the ability to write whatever you want in your ordinances or make whatever accommodation you think is necessary. So.
Okay. Well, this is an appeal from a decision. It's not an appeal from the decision to deny the variance, correct? There's no appeal from that part of the Planning and Zoning Board's decision-making. They denied the variance, and so there's no appeal of that, so that stands, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so then the Planning and Zoning Board approved a request, something that, and we are constrained by the record on, was there anything in the record? What was the request, or what were the grounds for the request, and was there sufficient evidence to grant that request? So that'd be the first thing we have to do. Correct, Mr. Wilson?
That's correct.
Okay.
And as I said, they didn't really have the power to grant the permission to do this. They're passing it off to the city commission to make a decision. So their decision, their motion, and what they actually passed really has no legal effect at all. So that's why you can do, to me, there's almost no decision here but to grant the appeal and set aside their decision. But as Mr. Kincaid said, the decision at the Planning and Zoning Board was to find a way to accommodate the wishes of the mother and the child to solve the problem, and that would have to be something you do legislatively, I would imagine.
So once we make a decision on the appeal, then perhaps the commission can talk about what are some alternatives. It is a code enforcement issue. And so it can be, we might be able to talk about what we might be able to do with code enforcement. We might be able to talk about what we can do with any changes to ordinances.
Mayor, it's not actually pending before the Code Enforcement Board now. I don't know that there's been a notice of violation. I know there's been no call to tell them to appear at the Code Enforcement Board. So really, it's a staff decision right now about whether or not it goes to Code Enforcement at all.
Okay, I thought I saw a complaint here.
There's a complaint.
Complaint, but nothing else,
But
but no
people
hearing.
complain a lot. I can tell
Okay.
you that Code
All right.
Enforcement received complaints on a lot of issues.
Okay.
Many of which have nothing to do with Code Enforcement.
So maybe we can discuss that code enforcement complaint and any kind of alternatives there.
Excuse me, Mr. Wilson, could you advise us what options that we have in order to help make this work without changing our existing code?
Well, one thing would be just simply not pursue a code enforcement action at all. Direct staff not to do that. Direct the city manager not to do that. Other than that, and whenever you do something like that, you're basically running the risk that you're going to do selective enforcement. So if anybody else comes in with chickens, well, the commission wouldn't allow us to go after these chickens, so you can't go after mine either. So you might have a bunch of chicken farms around the city. The other solution would be to develop a way to create certain restrictions on how to keep this type of animal and try to take care of whatever issues may be of concern to the neighbors. And I don't know what that would be because I'm not an expert on keeping and raising chickens. But obviously there'd be any animal that anybody would keep, they'd be required to keep it in a clean and safe manner so it doesn't become offensive to the neighbors around them. And what that would entail is I couldn't give you any ideas right now, but I'm sure we could look up something somewhere down the road.
So would another possibility be to add a segment to the code stating that requests for support animals be brought before the commission
That
for
could be done,
approval?
and then you could have.
So that we
certain-
could do a case-by-case basis?
To establish standards for that, for support animals, and require doctors' opinions and that sort of thing. I'm sure we could develop regulations that.
And
that
then we would
direction.
need something about the care, for example, like what the county has as far as the parameters of
Exactly.
having things. Here are my concerns, and I apologize
And
for.
the numbers
for-
of animals, things like that. I mean, there's a billion little
Right.
things you can do. If this was roosters, they make noise. Hens don't make quite as much noise. I understand these are hens, not roosters. So, rooster next
I
to my
am
wife's-
concerned about just allowing it and instructing our staff not to do anything about it, because just like Mr. Wilson said, how does that prevent somebody else from getting chickens and saying, well, you let them do it, so you have to let me do it? But if we put a part into our code where we do get the opportunity to visit isolated instances on a case-by-case basis, that would give us the power and knowledge of where it's at within our own community. Because isn't that what it's about, is like making things for ourselves to be able to regulate?
Well, I wasn't suggesting that code enforcement do nothing, but perhaps a delay. One of the things is we don't have all the information here. We haven't, this is an unusual situation, the first time it's come up, even planning and zoning said. So there has been information given to us on perhaps, is there any federal or state laws we should consider, should the Code Enforcement Board consider? So that may be an alternative to tell code enforcement and the city staff to research this and then perhaps look at our ordinances to see if there should be some changes. But in the meantime, we still need, and so that means if there's no code enforcement right away, and we have time to research, at minimum maybe 90 days, then at least we can all learn more about what might be available under a federal or state Fair Housing Act, and what we might want to do with our ordinance, and delay any kind of action for code enforcement for a minimum period of 90 days with an extension if need be. So I open it up to the floor for any other comments.
I think we're all kind of heading in the same direction here is what I'm starting to hear. I was of very same mind as far as we need to have a mechanism in place that's individualized and circumstantial, analyzes the individual circumstances. I think it's a slippery slope to say, don't do any code enforcement, so I think we need to give some more specific guidance like the mayor just suggested. I do want to, for Mr. Wilson, just for the record and for everyone in this room, how long does the process take to modify or an ordinance with public hearings?
Well, it requires us to, we only have one meeting a month, generally speaking, so it would take at least 1 month for first reading, another month for second reading, but you'd also have to try to figure out what exactly you want to do, what suggestions you want to add into this. And I would also add, as far as code enforcement goes, I would think it would be a defense in the code enforcement action, the ADA accommodations and those type of things. So I would think it'd be very difficult possibly for us to even get a code enforcement order prohibiting this under the circumstances. So that would be, I would want to do a lot of research on that before I go anywhere too. So the suggestion to delay code enforcement until the issue can be researched is a great idea, actually. And in the meantime, we'll try to find out what we can do to create an accommodation for these type of things without creating a monster out of these things. You hate to make law based on one particular incident, but this is something that I mean, I know from the Vietnam War veterans guy was here earlier, I know that's been a therapeutic way for a lot of Vietnam War veterans or other war veterans to adjust to the circumstances after PTSD or something, to have support animals of some sort. They don't necessarily have to be dogs, they might be chickens, who knows? But these are things that people find calming and comforting, and if you can find a way to integrate these into our legal system somehow, I think you'll go somewhere with it. There's certainly going to be plenty of information out there now that justifies doing things like this, just a matter of tailoring it to the needs of the city. I mean, when you look at the code prohibits a lot of things that I'm sure people have in their houses, like reptiles and things. I'm sure plenty of people have snakes that we don't know about. They're not crawling around the neighborhood usually. We don't know them or see them, but they're out there. So enforcement is always going to be an issue, but chickens, since they don't live in the house, are a little different animal.
Mr. Wilson, if I could direct your attention to section 2.
I'm sorry, sir, we're
I
done.
just want to give you guys some that I found today that happened on.
Sir, I'm sorry, we can't take
You
new
can contact me
evidence.
directly about that.
Okay.
I'm in the book.
Sir, I'm sorry, we can't, we're confined to what's in the record and on the appeal process. So
I'm just giving you a code amendment that I
Okay.
just learned.
With
this
me
afternoon.
after the meeting, or you
After-
can contact my office
afterwards.
directly?
Yes. Okay, all right, commissioners, I can entertain a motion, or I will make one.
Is there any other discussion?
I just had a quick question,
Okay, yeah.
legal question. Jim, I know that the county has a 5-chicken, I guess, max. Would this fall under that as well, or how would that work?
County regulation isn't really enforceable here.
I just want to make sure that they're protected too, because,
Strict prohibition of this, so the county law doesn't apply here at all on this.
okay. I
We
just
have
want to
the
make sure we
ability
can,
to write
our own
we can write
ordinance.
whatever we want.
Okay, just wanted to
We've
make
got-
sure.
We've got home rule here, as long
Sure.
as the state lets us keep it. So I think we can do whatever we want to do in this case.
Okay. And then lastly, I like the ideas so far, and I'm for it, and I empathize and sympathize for your family to going through this. So having 5 kids of my own, I really do understand it. The question I have too is if it comes before us as a picking and choosing, are we opening ourselves up for that as well? Or is it just a blanket code that allows X that we have to do? I guess would be the other question.
I think the best way to resolve this would be to do something in the code, if you want to permit this, that would permit this and have certain safeguards on it to both protect the neighbors and to ensure that everybody doesn't have a support chick, if that's what you want to do. So that's, it's legislatively is the way to handle this, and there's enough brain power on this commission, and hopefully the new city attorney will be, that can help you with this, get this question resolved, because I probably won't be around long enough to help you with it.
Okay, those are my only questions.
I've got 90 days left.
Any further comments?
No, I think whatever action, we do have to make a decision on the appeal, correct?
I feel like we do, yes.
I think Mr. Law has a question in the back.
Mr. Law?
This is purely a recommendation, and it would take at least 3 months to amend the code, but regarding hens, we could simply remove it from the prohibited uses and make it a conditional use, which would require the planning and zoning to review it, followed by the commission. That's just one option, so it wouldn't give a blanket check like Ms. Costa was concerned about. And as far as the county, they have recently passed a rule that allows up to 5 hens, and they have in their land development code a series of A through I of terms, so they do have it. This, I believe, was changed last December.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Ready for, anyone want to make a motion on the appeal?
A motion on the appeal, then a motion on what other direction you want to give staff.
Right, right. So, motion on the appeal first. If no one steps forward, I'll make a motion that, that the commission reverse the decision of the Planning and Zoning Board, where the Planning and Zoning Board granted approval of a request based on the record that was not clear and maybe lack of authority to.
Mayor, may I suggest a different motion, perhaps?
Okay.
That you vacate the decision, not
Okay,
reverse
vacate.
it. There's really nothing to reverse. I would say to
Okay,
vacate.
Vacate the decision, based on the record and advice of attorney, lack of authority, lack of evidence on the record, what the decision was based on with regard to at law. So, City Clerk, if you'll call a roll on that part, that motion.
Don't you need a second?
Yeah.
And second?
Let me second and ask a further question. Do we need to affirm the variance denial or not?
Well, no, the variance denial has already been done. There's nothing, there's no further action to take on
No
that.
appeal.
I just
of
wanted
that.
to make
Yeah.
sure we didn't have to do that. So I do second that motion.
You have a question?
Nope.
All right.
Could you I'm sorry, could you restate the motion, please?
The motion is to vacate the decision of the Planning Zoning Board only with regard to what has been appealed, is that the approval of a request due to what's in the record and lack of evidence basis of at law on what to base that approval on.
Thank you.
Mayor England,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Costa,
Yes.
Commissioner George, is recused, Commissioner Rumwell,
Yes.
and Commissioner Samora.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
And then I'd like to go further to give guidance to our code enforcement to delay any hearing or code enforcement on this issue, to give city staff and the code enforcement board adequate time to research the issue under any other kind of reasonable accommodation under federal or state law for a minimum of 90 days with perhaps an extension. Be the second motion.
Can I amend that to 120 days, just because we're going through a change in city attorneys, and we'll have to get them up to speed, so
Okay.
instead of, and I appreciate the fact that there's an extension there, but I think we might as well just go with
Okay.
120 days.
All right, I'll take that.
Could we also add to request Mr. Law to help develop the additional part of the code?
Well, I was going to do that as a third motion, but I can add it to this one. I can add it
Put it all
to
in
this
the
one.
same
Let's
plate.
put it all in the same one. So the motion would be to delay code enforcement for 120 days to give adequate time for research, and to also direct city staff to research any changes to our ordinance to accommodate emotional support animals.
I'll second that.
Beverly, will you call the roll on that one?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor England,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Costa,
Yes.
Commissioner George is recused, Commissioner Rumwell,
Yes.
Commissioner Samora.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Right. So thank you all for coming and voicing your opinion, and we'll see if we can figure this out. The board will recess for 5 minutes to let everybody disperse and get a full commission back. Back on task. Might be able to finish tonight. This is continuing our meeting. Item number 2, a public hearing and final reading of ordinance 20-01 on restricting micro-mobility devices in St. Augustine Beach. Mr. Wilson.
This is something that we've talked about for a few months, and I made some, we had this on first reading last month, and I made the changes the commission directed me to make. And just to briefly summarize what we're doing here, we are going to prohibit these shared mobility devices from operating on sidewalks or other places. They're restricted to motor vehicle traffic lanes and the like. That would only apply to the ones that are business-related shared mobility devices, not other scooters or those type of things. And we're also prohibiting the shared mobility device program from operating in the city limits. And that's essentially what you wanted me to do, and that's what this ordinance now does. It's been modified to cover the terms as listed in statutes. So I think Robbie's reviewed this, and I think it's okay. So with that in mind, if you have any other questions about how we're going to deal with this, I'll be happy to answer them, but I think I've covered everything the commission wanted to do.
Okay. Commissioners, this is the second time we've looked at the ordinance. Is there any further questions or changes that you would like to ask about this before we have public comment?
I have some, yes.
Perfect.
Let's see. Mr. Wilson, looking at section, it's on page 6 of the ordinance, section 19-66, use of sidewalks and certain other right-of-ways. And then subsection A says that basically all the pathways, sidewalks, everything are available for use by pedestrians or non-motorized, non-electric bicycles, except for the following. And then it lists 1, 2, and 3. And number 2 is shared use paths. What I'm concerned about there is the future River to Sea loop, where the paths are going to be, I think, a minimum of 8 feet wide, and they're going to be shared use paths. So is our intent to, from what I'm reading here, this accepts those. Those would be thereby open to motorized scooters.
If so designated by the city manager. It leaves that open there, and since we don't really have, it's not really applicable at this point, this is just something that will have to be addressed at some future time.
So you feel that because as designated by the city manager, we'll cover that?
That's correct. If you want to give the city manager direction, if you find there to be an issue in these things, that's what the commission does.
And number 3, where it just says sidewalks that are at least 8 feet wide, if they put a 12-foot wide or 10-foot wide pathway through the city, do we need to have the same verbiage there, or is that also going to be an exception to that?
I think it would wind up being an exception to that if and when that happens. So we're talking about the future. I can't predict that.
Yeah.
So.
Do we?
And I don't know what's going on with the mobility program that the state's doing. I'm not sure where that even is or where they're going to get the right of way to do all these things, but it's not happening yet.
I would just strike that then, would be my recommendation to strike number 3 out at least, then just in preparation for River to Sea Loop or any other.
That wouldn't be a problem. Take that out. Just make that part of the motion when you consider this. When you just consider a vote. Can I want me to go ahead and read it by title only right now so we get that out of the way also?
Sure. Right.
Okay, ordinance 20-01, an ordinance of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Florida, creating Article 4 of Chapter 19 of the Code of the City of St. Augustine Beach, providing definitions, restricting certain vehicles in certain areas and sidewalks of the city, providing regulations relating to the city's public, providing penalties, semicolon out there, providing penalties, providing for inclusion in the Code of the City of St. Augustine Beach, providing for repeal of conflicting ordinances, providing for severance of invalid provisions, and providing for an effective date.
Okay.
With that in mind.
Any further comments? Do we have any further comments? Any public speakers?
Yes, Ed Slavin?
Ed Slavin, Box 3084. Good work, y'all. This is a necessary regulation, and they're dangerous and unsafe at any speed. And I think the fact that the Florida League of Cities had suggested a $2 million per occurrence threshold, if you did allow it, that says about everything that needs to be said. And it's righteous. Thank you.
Any further public comment?
No.
All right. Anyone would like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 20-01, subject to the amendment of removing subparagraph 3 from subparagraph A of section 19-66.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all right. Done with that item. We can move on to item number 3, ordinance 20-02, first public hearing and second reading to adopt changes to the Land Development Code. Mr. Law.
Yes, ma'am. Last month, we saw the proposed changes to the Land Development Code, several sections. It did go to the Planning and Zoning Board where they recommended approval as written. So I'm not sure if we want to talk about them individually again, if we have any questions.
Commissioners, we've seen this a couple of times, but if there's any further questions, please feel free to bring them up.
Otherwise, I'll go ahead and read by title.
Yes.
Ordinance number 20-02, an ordinance of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Florida, amending land development codes of the city as contained within Article 3, Land Use Type, Density, Intensity, Article 4, Consistency and Concurrency, Determinations, Article 5, Resource Protection, Article 6, relating to Development, Design, and Improvement Standards, Building Setback Requirements, providing for severability, providing for codification, and providing for an effective date.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 20-02.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Item number 4, ordinance 20-03, public hearing and final reading to adopt the school board's 5-year district work plan.
Yes, this comes up to you every year in November or December, usually. It was a little late this year from receiving the information from Ms. Nicole Cubbage of the school board staff. So we have no schools, et cetera, in the city. By law, we have to show that we are supportive of the school board's 5-year facilities work plan. We always adopt it by reference.
Mr. Royal, there's no changes from when we looked at it from last month?
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Any questions or discussion about what's in front of us? Do we need to read an ordinance here?
I'll need to read the title of the ordinance.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on over there. Ordinance 20-03, an ordinance of the City Commission of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Florida, adopting the St. Johns County School Board's 5-year district facilities work plan by reference into the capital improvements element of the City of St. Augustine Beach Comprehensive Plan, adopting an additional capital improvement into the capital improvements element of the City of St. Augustine Beach Comprehensive Plan, providing for repeal of conflicting ordinances, providing for severance of invalid provisions, and providing for an effective date.
I'll make a motion, Mayor, to adopt.
Do we have any public comment?
No.
Okay,
Unless I-
go ahead.
I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 20-03 as read.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Not hearing any opposed, that motion passes. All right, on to item
5, consent.
consent item. Okay, all right. Max, I think you're going to present this one?
Yeah, this is every election, you are asked to pass a resolution in accordance with the city charter to designate the county's canvassing board to certify vote-by-mail ballots in the particular election. In this election here, it references the March 2020 presidential primary, which will be held next month here.
Any questions about this resolution? Any requests for public speaking?
Nope, none on
Okay.
this item. Public comment,
I'll make a
okay.
motion to approve Resolution 20-01.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed, the resolution passes. All right, on to old business. Legal Services review of the proposed contract with new city law firm Paul Eklund Bronze and Paul of DeLand, Florida. And this is a new contract,
Need to talk about this a little bit, or?
please.
What we've done here, I was directed to prepare a contract with the new law firm based upon what was approved by the commission as, with their because proposals. It essentially calls for a $6,000 monthly retainer, which will pay for 35 hours of regular work, and the firm will charge $175 an hour for extra legal work, which includes litigation and that sort of behavior. This contract is essentially identical to the one that was, that our firm has operated under for the last 4 years, and except for the provision that any work in addition to 35 hours would be paid for additionally. That's the only substantial change in the contract. This was put in there at the request of the firm. They're not here tonight, and otherwise, the contract meets legal requirements, and it's legally sufficient. If you have any questions about how the contract works or is administered, I'll be happy to answer those questions at this point. And it's up to you to determine. You've made your selection of this firm, and it's up to you whether you want to now go ahead and enter into the contract with the conditions that they've added to it. So, with that in mind, it's up to you.
It seems like they're kind of backtracking on what they said they were going to agree to by putting a limit on the hours. I mean, you know, there were other applicants who were suggesting an hourly rate as opposed to the flat fee that we had requested. And I discounted, you know, in terms of ranking the points and hierarchies among the applicants, it was a significant factor that they had said they would agree to the flat rate for those basic services. So I'm a little disappointed that when the draft comes back, they've modified that particular term. Was there any discussion with the firm about that issue, Mr. Wilson?
I sent the contract to them, and they sent it back with some changes, and they talked to me about this for a while, and I essentially told them that, generally speaking, 35 hours should be enough to cover this. Certainly, I've had times when I spent a lot more time than that, and it depends on how they bill. Just to read the agenda for each one of these matters and attend meetings is considerable work, and I speak to staff and everybody else on a regular basis. Seems like every day I have something that we're doing, and meetings to attend and documents to prepare. So that takes some time, and maybe I'm slower than some people, but it all depends on how it works in process. I don't think there would be very many times I would ever bill anything above the retainer, because I don't think I often spend much more than 40 hours doing this. They're asking for 35, and they may be more efficient than me, and if you find problem with their billing, then you can certainly talk to them about that when the bills come. Max gets the bills, and I've never had any complaints about my bills, because I don't usually keep track of my hours that well anyway. I think this would probably meet the requirements. I don't think they should go over 35 hours very often. They're not charging for mileage, not charging for travel time. And so that being taken out of it, it's just your meetings and preparation for the meetings and preparation of any documents that would be prepared for planning and zoning or the commission. So it all depends. I wouldn't anticipate you having to pay more than that very often, but you never know. Law office economics being what they are, $175 an hour is not a very high rate, and it's not easy to make a living doing that when you've got support staff and rent to pay. When you look at the bills that my law firm
has to take care of every month, it's pretty difficult to make a living at that rate. But since I live cheap, it's different.
But so was there specific discussion about this modification, or did they just kind of shoot the draft back to you to see?
No, they talked to
how
me
we-
about it. I talked to them on the phone for like half hour, 45 minutes, and sent the contract to them while I was talking to them. So they
Right.
had it at that point, and they sent it back an hour or so later with these changes, which I had anticipated from the discussion with them. So it wasn't like they just dropped a hand grenade on me. I knew they were going to suggest this, and I said, it's going to be up to the commission as to whether or not they accept that or not. It's your decision.
Right.
So if you want to renegotiate them, you can do that if you want to. If they want to get a little extra money on the side, above the retainer, and then delete this part of it, that's up to you if you want to renegotiate something. So,
Is this a one-year term?
actually, there's no term. You can fire them, you've got 30 days notice of termination. There is no term. I've never really wanted to be bound to
So
the
with
term.
30 days' notice, if we are watching the bill and, if all of a sudden, we have 5 months that it's less than 35 hours, it's 20 hours, and then we have a month where there's extra work and they hit us, we may want to renegotiate some maximum flow over or something like that, if it seems like, for the most part, they're not spending the 35 hours, but then we just have one oddball month and they hit us with a bill,
That's correct.
okay?
Or,
I don't think they're going to ask you to refund, they'll be refunding money if they don't do the
Right,
35
right,
hours.
yeah.
So that's, to me.
No, I know it's not in there now.
right, or conversely, if we reject their modifications, they could certainly track their hours over the next couple months and come back to us and say, hey, this really is more work than we had expected. And then based upon hard data of real hour tracking, as opposed to estimates from prior experience, then we could renegotiate.
And I did tell them that you were responsive when we said this retainer simply isn't adequate, and we saw that from the applicants you got the first time you tried to run the applicants through. I said you were very responsive to me when we talked about changing the retainer and doing something with it. So I indicated that you were not you're not generally hardcore. I never had a hard time over billing anything with the city. I've never had a question about anything. So I guess I'm not charging enough. But I did indicate that. So this will be up to you. It's a trial period. This is like I said, this firm has a good reputation. The lawyers all have a good reputation. And so if it works out, you may not pay anything extra for a while. But when it gets into budget session, they may wind up burning some more hours because you have more meetings. So it all depends on what you're looking for. But it's certainly subject to negotiation.
Just had two comments real fast. One, I went back to the minutes just to see, and on page 6 of the minutes, when they submitted the proposal to $175 an hour, they agreed to the revised request, which I think we capped it at that $6,000. And so my comment, and I think I mentioned this to Jim on the phone about this, was what about rollover time? So if they don't bill us only 30 hours, then we get the additional 5 hours for a month that we may need that time, especially during budget season and stuff like that. So, I think they would be great for the city. However, we agreed, they knew it was 40 hours going into it. That was what we sent to them. And I think that there needs to be a little wiggle room, and maybe a couple months. Maybe that's the best way to figure out is the hard data of what it really is, and maybe they may say, look, it's only 30 hours a month. Well, if that's the case, then we're going to pay you for 35, and then when we need those extra 5, we're going to use them.
Yeah, put them in the bank.
Put them in the bank.
That's not a bad idea. And that's why it's a trial period, because I do such a terrible job of keeping track of my time doing this. I couldn't give them a rock-solid estimate. The times I have kept track of it, it might have been under heavy use periods, too. So,
Sure.
But, so it all depends, and it certainly is open to whatever you want to do. So, and I would hate to see you go through the hiring process again, though.
That's the only comments I had, Mayor.
Okay, well, are there changes? Is there something we'd like to go back to the law firm with do we want to go back and say, no, we need 40 instead of 35?
Well,
Or do
just
we
to
want
that
to try
point-
this?
To that point of, 40, And I believe the revised terms didn't even put a 40 limit on there. And I asked every single applicant, including them, if they were okay with the revised terms.
Okay.
So I don't have a problem working with them after maybe, I would really like to see a one-year cycle of what we agreed to, right? And then they can track over the course of the whole year, the highs and the lows of the time. And if there's a provision in here anyway where there's 30 days, if they get into it and the first few months are going to be so busy that it's beyond the economic bargain they were anticipating, they can always tell us that they give us 30 days notice and say, we need to revise this. I feel like we should play a hard bargain here and just say, well, we reject the modifications to paragraph B, and I think all the others are just, are fine. I don't think there's anything else here. And with the message that, well, we were specifically negotiating for a flat rate to start out with a new firm, and that, of course, we're going to be open to potential modifications in the future when hard data is received.
Okay, in other words, put the onus on them to track their time and come back to us to renegotiate if they feel like they're spending too much time for the 6,000.
Right, and, in fact, we could put in there that we want them to track their time. I don't know if that's something we should get into so that we know. Maybe we are.
Usually, if you're avid tracking your time, we may lose out on that one.
Okay, yeah, well, most months. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
It kind of depends, but, so, yeah, and it's up to them if they want to track their time then. That would be my suggestion. I don't want to lose them. However, we did have other good applicants who also stated at the public meeting that they were willing to follow through with the revised terms.
The other thing, I want to give Mr. Wilson a chance to, because you have been so gracious to stay with us. And if we don't do a contract, then you're stuck for a little while, so.
One of my friends said I was being held hostage by you guys.
Well, what if we approve the modified, approve the contract, having removed the modifications to paragraph B, and have the mayor sign it and send it over to them? And then that way, if they want to step right into it, they can.
I can certainly call them in the morning and tell them what the discussion was.
Right. Yeah, I share the same concerns. They were very clear, the conversation was very clear about the terms, and to change the terms after the fact seems a little disingenuous. So I am a little concerned about that. I don't even know if concern is the right word. And also, it doesn't really specify, do we get a specific attorney, or is it going to be rotating faces throughout the?
It designated Mr. Groot as the city
I know,
attorney,
but
and the
and then
others
it crossed
as
him out.
assistants.
No, on paragraph B. His name is crossed out on the signature line because he's not signing on behalf of the firm, but in paragraph B,
Okay.
it does state that
Primary
he's the
indiv- okay.
primary.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
So I would be comfortable with your suggestion, in order to be able to move this forward, is crossing that part out and being adamant about, we did agree to terms, I thought.
Well, this was their proposal, and that there was nothing extra in the proposal. I went back and reviewed it, just to make sure I wasn't making a mistake here somewhere. So it was the proposal. This was just, I guess they got the willies after they talked to me. I don't know. Maybe I just made them nervous.
Do we have any other questions on this right now before we take public comment? Okay.
Ed Slavin?
Thank you for your work on this. Ed Slavin, Box 3084. I totally agree. You had a bargain. You're entitled to the benefit of the bargain, and this firm is not making a very good impression on you tonight. So I would suggest that you reject their offer, counteroffer, as was suggested, sign it for the benefit of the bargain that you actually made, and if they don't accept it, go with Ralph Brooks. Because I was not impressed with this firm, and especially when they were up here, and It was just a couple words that they said about planning and zoning that was kind of a tip-off as to what kind of people these were. They said, remember, we don't care. You set priorities as the commission, and we'll do whatever you say. That's the theory of the lawyer as hired knife thrower, which my jurisprudence professor at Memphis State talked about. We want somebody who's ethical and reflects the values of St. Augustine Beach. That's Ralph Brooks. Now, I think if Ralph Brooks were to come back with a more fleshed-out plan for backup, I think you'd want to go with him. Because what I'm hearing is this firm reminds me of the firm that the Anastasia Mosquito Control District of St. Johns County hired back in 2007 after Jeffrey Dobson quit and before we actually got good legal advice on the $1.8 million helicopter. And it was a five-person firm in Daytona Beach, and they were mainly about billing, not about government service. And the thing about Ralph Brooks, from what I heard and what I've seen, he's about government service, and that I think he's your guy. 3 of y'all voted for him, 5 votes were for this firm, but I think it's very disappointing and quite frankly Donald Trump-like for this law firm to make changes. And I think if you look up the law of government contracts, I think it's a cardinal change to materially alter the terms and conditions that you agreed to when they were at this podium. So I would not recommend you hire them. I mean, this bodes very poorly as to their working relationship. Thank you.
Do we need a motion on this?
Okay, I do have a question after
Okay, all
that
right.
public comment. Gosh, what was my question? Oh. Is it within our scope to give the mayor authority to negotiate something between this and what we're proposing? I think what we were going to make a motion back to, which was our...
Certainly can.
Because I hate public negotiation. I think it's almost impossible to do. We're negotiating with someone who's not in the room. I, for one, I don't think I would change I wouldn't want to go back through the interview process again based on this contract. So I was just wondering if maybe we can go ahead and resubmit this with our original terms. If they kick it back, I would hate to have to go through another meeting and hold Jim hostage. So maybe we can...
I can certainly, if you want to make that part of your motion, then I'll advise them of what the situation is tomorrow morning. And then if they reject your counter proposal, then if you want to authorize the mayor to discuss it with them, I can certainly do that. Try to finalize it, and I'll hang around for the duration if you need me to.
I did hear some other ideas with the rollover hours, which I believe was in some of the other competing proposals, which is a good one. So I think there's some middle ground, and we're pretty close. I just would hate to have this keep coming back and coming back. That's my only concern. I'm fine with whether what they return back to us or going back to our original proposal. Either way, I'm fine.
What are the other commissioners' thoughts on that?
Well, I'm thinking that we approve the contract and remove the changes in section B and send it back to them. Sign it and send it back. See what happens.
I worry if we make a formal motion including the flexibility, that it sends the wrong message, that it almost negates what we're trying to accomplish.
That's part of it. Unfortunately, if we do it that way, then
Right.
Jim may be
It
here with
burdens
us
Jim.
in March also.
Well, the same thing.
But they may accept it.
They can, with 30 days' notice. I mean, they could start off and track the hours, and they've got the right with 30 days' notice to say, to cancel, or we need to renegotiate, just like, we do. So I would see if they're willing to go along with this, just see.
Well, I'll let you know tomorrow what I find out.
Can I ask a legal question? So if they don't agree to the terms that they agreed to before, do we have to go through the interview process, or can we go to our number 2 choice?
You can go to your number 2 choice, or you can reconsider. Well, I think there are only, how many firms actually? There were 5 firms that that you may want to revote the thing if you want to, or you can go to your second choice. It's up to you. It's really up to the commission at that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm,
Mayor and Commissioners, can I step in for 1 minute?
Absolutely.
If you'll
Please.
give me the number, I'll step outside and call him and see if he can call on speakerphone and we can get this done right now. If there's a cell phone number for him, I'll call him right now.
well, I don't know that it's a number so much as just removing that language in subparagraph B.
No, I'm sorry, the phone number to Mr. Elkine.
I
Is it
see,
Elkin?
phone number.
And just call him and see if you can take a phone call right now.
Well, I think I know I personally would rather just remove that section because it's new to us and send the contract back to him via Mr. Wilson and just see if they'll accept it.
I feel like that's the appropriate procedure. I think that it might have more of an impact, Chief. I think that's brilliant to try to,
Yes, ma'am, I was just trying to
just get
save.
right in and get it done.
Mr. Wilson From continuing the contract.
I'm
the monthly
surprised they're
contract.
not here, our representative is not here, actually.
Yeah. Thank you, Chief, very much again. No, I agree with you,
I
Mayor.
don't mind, I'll bill for it, Robbie.
I'll stay in my lane, my apologies.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve the contract draft as presented, subject to the modification of removing the language added to paragraph B's second paragraph, starting after the reference to see attached Exhibit B for regular scope of work.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, the motion passes.
And thank you, Jim, for, yes,
Continue to be held hostage.
being an agreeable hostage.
All right.
Makes it more fun.
Moving on, item number 7, drainage project to pipe the alley between 2nd and 3rd Streets from 2nd Avenue to Sea Oaks. Mr. Tredick.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. This item is award of bid for Third Alley Ditch Drainage Improvements Project. This is that's forward here. This map shows where the project is, south of 3rd Street, north of 1st Street, west of the unopened 2nd Street right-of-way, 2nd Avenue. No, west of 2nd Avenue, north of the unopened 2nd Street right-of-way. The project improves stormwater conveyance capabilities, reduces maintenance on the ditch, which is in people's or butting people's backyards. It reduces standing water and associated mosquito breeding areas, and it eliminates erosion to adjacent properties, which we have had on the properties to the north. We put the project out for bids. We got 6 bidders. A pretty good selection. As you can see, there's a bit of a range in the bids. I don't know if that's because some are hungrier than others, but the bottom 2 or 3 are close enough to make it seem like it's a reasonable bid. The low bidder is Hassel Construction or Contracting International LLC at just under $120,000, $119,999. This is slightly more than we anticipated. We had an estimate of $110,000 for the project in our budget, so it's close, but it's a little bit over. We do have funds in the budget. We have $20,000 in miscellaneous drainage, so we can take $10,000 there and make it work. So funds are available in the FY 2020 Road and Bridge drainage budget to complete the project. So our recommendation is approval of the tabulation of bids for the Third Alley Ditch Drainage Improvements Project and authorize the city manager to enter into a lump sum contract with the low bidder, Hassel Company, in the amount of $119,999 for construction of the project. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Tredick, have you been able to review the specs in detail to make sure that their contract has included everything you think it needs to include, so they can't come back with, oh, we didn't think about this, or there's these change orders?
Well, there is always potential for change orders. It is a lump sum contract, which makes it a little less likely. We already downsized the price of this project quite a bit with the engineer prior to bidding.
So I think we're about as low as we can. The specs are fairly tight. It's a fairly simple project. There's not a lot of ambiguity in what we're
Okay.
doing. It's just some inlets and some pipe. So I really don't expect change orders, or at least nothing of significance on the project.
And this is a standard contract. Is it their contract that they sent to us?
No, this is our standard contract.
This is our standard contract.
It's
That's-
essentially the same contract we've been using with
That,
other
oh, that's,
companies in the past.
that's great to know. That way, okay, that's perfect, perfect. Okay.
I like that it has the penalty for unexcused delays.
Me too.
And I did check the references, don't have it in the slideshow, but I did check references that they submitted. All the references came back well. So I don't really foresee any problems there, as long as we stay on top of them, make sure they stay on schedule and on budget.
The only change I have, Mr. Tredick, thank you for the presentation. As always, you do a wonderful job. On page 25, Article 3, contract time, I was always taught that the written number of time, not the number itself, hold precedent in the court. And we have 150 days, and when, in parentheses, we have 120 days. So I'd like to stay with the 120 for that part of it instead of the 150.
Oh, yeah.
Can you say again where that is?
Bottom paragraph.
Bottom
page
paragraph,
25.
page 25, 3.1.1.
So the plan was for 120 days to
We
get...
have 150. We'll work within 150, but then in parentheses, we have 120.
So 120 is to substantial completion,
Right?
and then we have 30 days, we generate an inspection, do a punch list, and we
Okay.
have 30 days to close out the project.
So that's,
That's just a typo, I guess.
okay.
It could be, and I'll look at
Yeah,
that.
I just wanted to make sure, because I don't want somebody to take advantage of it and come back and say, oh, you gave us
Oh,
100.
yeah, I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I just want to just match it all up so it equals each other.
I absolutely will make that correction.
That was the
I
only,
missed that. I apologize.
change I had.
Nice catch.
Thank you.
Bye.
Any other comments, changes recommended right now? Public comment?
None on this item?
Fine.
Oh, I am so sorry.
Ms. Palmquist.
Ann Popkis.
Ann Palmquist, 213 10th Street. I've got three issues. One, this seems to be the way that the city has chosen to go, and I question the scope of the work. We have many alleys, we have flooding problem, and we have a sea level rise that we are not necessarily addressing with cement pipes. The problem is the scope of the work should include the entire city that has drainage problems. To do it piecemeal at a time, I'm not sure our city can afford this type. I have personal experience with a pipe between 11th Street and A, which is through the McGarvey. The problem is, it starts at one, it finishes at the other, and there's very little outflow as far as cleaning it or anything else. They apparently corrected that problem along Mickler. If you go on the new, they've got outflows where they can clean during that area from 11th to 16, I believe it is, or Pope. And the problem is, if this does not have a maintenance and an overall maintenance cost, then you are simply adding for additional pipes to be put in, but it doesn't solve the problem as far as generally the scope. The maintenance of that ditch between Mickler and 11th and A Street is minimal at best. They just don't, you can't get into the pipe because they don't have clean out spots along the way that I'm aware of. Maybe they've since put them in. But the problem is, it sets a precedent. Instead of going green, we're going cement. And there's a vast difference in shade of intent of what you're going to do about flooding.
Mr. Tredick, would you like to respond?
As far as maintenance goes, I anticipate the pipe will be a whole lot less maintenance than an open ditch, which requires mowing, going in there.
on a regular basis, controlling the vegetation growth, which impedes the flow. We will be able to get into the pipe system through structures, through inlet structures, periodically. Our maintenance crews do that. We have a drainage foreman who goes around and inspects the drainage catch basins, inlets around the city. So I don't anticipate any maintenance problems with this. It's probably not going to require nearly as much maintenance as an open ditch will. And, you know, there's other aspects to this too. We're dealing with an open ditch system in people's backyards, and, you know, people have different opinions upon that, and I respect that. But as far as people's safety, snakes, all sorts of things that live in wet ditches, as well as mosquito breeding, I think it makes sense to have some separation between houses and ditches. That's just my personal opinion.
Madam Mayor, I visited this property almost 2 years ago now, I'd say, and it's situated similarly to the Ward's property that backed up to Michler, where it's been jeopardizing the property owner's retaining wall and, you know, patio area, like the same thing with the pool at the Ward's property. So I know they've been trying to have either the city do something or permission to do something themselves because it is posing such a threat to their safety over there.
Yes, and I've had pictures from the owners of collapsed portions of their deck, so this will resolve that issue forever.
So there's certain areas that the open ditches are fine, and there's certain areas like this and the Ward's property on Michler where it just got to the point where we needed to pipe the ditch. Do we have other areas that you're aware of that are getting dangerous? We may have to pipe a ditch?
Well, we certainly have other open ditches. We have Second Street, which is an unopened right-of-way, which eventually may be built and houses will go in there. So that, there's some ditches in there that would be piped. There's, of course, the rest of Michler from 16th to the south down to A Street, which is going to be a controversial discussion.
Yeah, it's in our master stormwater drainage plan, though, that remains open.
That's correct, but you're asking if there are ditches
Yeah,
adjacent
right.
to residential areas, and so that's a big one. And that's a decision that will come down the road. We're not making it anytime soon.
But we have to weigh each one and see what's
I believe so, yeah. You have to
environmentally-
look at the pros and the cons and determine whether it makes sense to do it from a public safety standpoint, or whether it makes sense to leave it as it is for the environmental benefits.
Now, are there any in our master plan that are planned to be covered, that are not yet covered, other than this one?
I would have to go back and review it. I can't think of one that's in our
Neither
capital
can I.
improvement plan right now,
Right. Okay,
but I'll be happy to get back with you on that.
okay, no rush, but curious.
Any other questions?
I also went to a house out there probably over a year ago now involving somebody who was complaining about this and brought that to the former Public Works Director's attention. This is probably where all this stuff has been going on, because I know he's been in contact with probably a lot of people over here.
Yeah.
Probably you too.
Yeah.
So this will take care of their problem.
Yeah.
Public comment?
We already did public comment.
Okay.
Oh, we did? Okay.
All
right.
Make a motion then to approve the bid as recommended to the Hassel Company is it International LLC with the modification or correcting typos in the contract.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. All right.
To get them out of the way right in a row.
There you
here.
go.
All right, agenda item 8 is the first reading of ordinance 20-05, the public hearing and first reading to amend, revise, and restate Chapter 10, Garbage and Trash of the City Code. This is a slide I used last presentation. I just amended it to include what happened on January 6th, where it was requested that staff bring back an ordinance with changes to the city's garbage and trash code as discussed, and that's what we're doing here tonight. So in that January 6th meeting, that's
my mistake here. Comparison of the City of St. Augustine Beach and the City of St. Augustine solid waste fee structures. Proposed changes for commercial customers were discussed. Some takeaways were the largest waste producers should utilize private collection. City needs to get away from a can count system, which is fairly labor intensive and not cost efficient. The rate structure, whatever we develop, should be fair and equitable, and try to make sure that the commercial pays at least as much as the residential. That was talked about. Transient rentals should be billed as commercial customers, and we actually discussed doing that on a monthly rate system, and explore alternatives for mixed-use buildings. So in drafting this ordinance, we tried to encompass all of that and encapsulate all of that, and we prepared a revised ordinance which shows those changes. And we can read through the changes if you want in a bit, but I'll just go over the key changes that are in there. We defined a commercial waste receptacle as either a 65 or 95-gallon cart. And there's some talk about whether it's 64 and 94, but it's essentially the same. We added a definition for a mixed-use building and added a definition of a transient rental. And one thing we did, we went to a 65-gallon minimum because this next bullet allows for shared use of commercial carts in mixed-use buildings. That way, we address that concern about commercial paying the same as residential, especially moving forward if we go to a non-ad valorem assessment of the 230 or get there over time as we talk about as a possibility. So that would bring that in roughly the same, slightly more for commercial with a 64-gallon cart, depending, of course, upon what the fee structure is. We're not going over that yet tonight, but depending upon what that fee structure is, it would bring the commercial in for a mixed-use building about the same as a residential. It allows for the discontinuation of city collection for condos of 6 or more units. There's still a clause in there that would allow the manager to not do it immediately. I haven't stricken that clause in case it takes time to move in that direction. And allows a discontinuation of city collection for businesses which generate more than 320 gallons per week, which is 10 32-gallon cans. It allows for additional pickup fees and adjustment of required carts. So the basic idea here is we will charge an additional fee. If we do that a period for 6 times in a year, they'll need to buy an additional cart so that they have adequate carts and they're paying an adequate amount in their base fee, and we can gradually phase out the additional fees, hopefully get to a point where we're not counting cans at all down the road. Allows for fees to be determined by resolution, which is, we don't have to come back here for an ordinance change every time, and allows for future requested adjustment. I think I made a typo there too. Sorry, I finished this up today. But allows a business, say their business changes in some way, and now they don't need as many cans. They'll come to us, they'll ask for an audit of their can count. We'll do the audit over a period of 6 months, give or take, because there could be some seasonal variability there. And then we can adjust that down if it's too much, if we're charging them too much. So I wanted to give a path to step back if we're overcharging. Oops, I guess that was it. There's also something in here which I meant to strike, and I apologize that I didn't. It was in relation to non-ad valorem assessments. I'm going to recommend that we don't deal with that right now. I think on Article 2, on page 22, I had highlighted collection and disposal, thinking at the time that it would be a good idea to move in that direction, but I think we'll just wait on that until we're ready to implement a non-ad valorem adjustment, and we can deal with that at that time. So we'll take those out for the second reading unless there's a strong feeling that we shouldn't.
I don't understand that change that you're talking about.
Well, when I wrote this, or when I drafted it, I was thinking we're moving towards a non-ad valorem assessment for collection and disposal, not just disposal.
I see, okay.
So I wrote it thinking that I would move in that direction, and I think we're not quite there yet. So it might be better to pull that back slightly and deal with that when we reach the point of decision, final decision on the non-ad valorem assessment. But again, that's entirely up to you.
And we can go through these in detail if you'd like, or I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Tredick, this, good work. This is well done. I noticed you put definitions in here. We have a section, I think it's chapter 2, where we have all our definitions in one section so that we don't have to search every time we change something. I was wondering if where you added transient rental, you might, for efficiency, just refer back to our, where it's possible, refer back to our definitions in the code.
Just copied the same definition.
He did. But if that changed, then you'd have to search throughout the whole code for, when we redid the code, we kind of agreed we'd keep all the definitions in one place and then refer back to that for other sections.
Yeah, certainly we can do that. I would defer to the attorney on how best to accommodate that.
That way we don't get out of whack, when we change something.
Yeah, and we had these definitions in this ordinance, which is one of the reasons I put it in here, just so it was standalone within this ordinance.
I think leave the word in there, but where you can, refer back to the definition in our definition section. And then on page 10, section 10.4, items number 1 and 2, those are, you either can have 4 32-gallon waste receptacles or 2 65-gallon is that an or, one or the other?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, for residential, we won't be, of course, they'll be responsible for their own
Right,
receptacles.
so think about whether you want to put that item number 1, A and B, so you get your or in there.
Yeah, that makes sense, thank you.
And on page 12, you have section in parens E, and the next one would be in parens F.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry, what are we doing in E and F?
you had struck out in parens F and put E, but that would give you 2 E's.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And on page 16, item number E, the city's police department shall have the authority to enforce the provisions of this section. Would it be the police department or code enforcement? I'm not seeing the police department enforcing trash pickup and trash recycling.
That's something that's already been in the code for a while, I
Yeah.
think. You didn't make any changes to that.
I did not make changes to that. We certainly could, if it's something that's desirous to do.
Just
but-
add a or and code enforcement?
Chief, you want to weigh in on this?
I think now is the time to change something that's probably very antiquated. I mean, and put it underneath the proper authority of the city, in my mind.
Okay.
Now,
So,
Commander
ta-
Ashlock is open to the suggestion. I'm just kidding.
I was talking to Brian Law about that, too.
I think now's our time to fix an
So,
antiquated.
Mr. Tredick, if you'll get
Thank you.
some input on that and think about that section.
Sounds like I just got it, so we can change that to
Let's do
the
it.
code enforcement.
we're doing it. Okay.
Great.
The time is now.
Those are all great comments.
And I think I'm done. Other commissioners, any comments?
I
please?
have a small typo on page 8, at the start of the underlined section, dumpster or commercial trash area shall be constructed, so it's just a little typo there, just add the word be. And then also, I wanted to talk about on page 17, I guess is really where it gets into the discussion about commercial service premises purchasing from the city, the waste carts. And I'm curious whether the city is ready to start providing those. And also, I'd like to suggest and bring into discussion the possibility of the city providing a decal, because a lot of these businesses already have perfectly good trash barrels of the same size. And just from a waste concept, it's wasteful to have to throw away a perfectly good lidded can. I understand the need for the city to be able to count and approve, but maybe there could be some sort of a decal that could either be stuck to or clipped to an approved existing can, so that those could be grandfathered, and when they, reach the end of their useful lives, then, we could replace them with the purchase of a city-provided can.
Yeah, I will say the reason I had it in there was for consistency, so there was no confusion about what was an acceptable container and what wasn't.
Yeah.
Certainly, a decal could do that also. I see no reason why we couldn't look into that. I mean, we're planning, these cans are probably going to be some sort of decal anyway that's attached to the standardized can.
Okay.
I imagine that would be a more cost-effective way than to have custom cans made, so. That's probably what we're going to be doing. We may even have some identification of the address so that people aren't taking someone else's can. There's a lot of things we have to implement, which is why we're thinking of this not immediate, but the one I had down here for October 1st, I think we were looking at implementing this. And another reason to do that is because we're going to have to buy the cans and then sell them at cost, and in order to do that and not have a budget problem paying for those cans, we have to show the revenue back in the same year.
Gotcha.
So we're anticipate doing that in the next fiscal year. But we can certainly look at that.
I'd be interested about your opinion professionally, as the expert on this. Is that going to hinder the services, or is it going to, if it's not going to make a difference, then I'd rather give the people the opportunity to use the cans they have, but.
I don't know that it will hinder, but it might make it slightly more challenging at times, depending upon the condition of the cans and whether it's, then we have to verify whether it's a conforming can, and so each one will require a little more work up front from that standpoint, but it can be done. I mean, we might get into why did you approve their can and not my can? They both work, they can both be lifted by the lift. There are some things we want to consider. We want to have them, first of all, the 65-gallon, it's a heavier can, it holds more. It's a little more resistant to animals because of its weight, because from what I've been told, and I'm not an expert, the raccoons have a little more trouble because they have to stand on top of it, and then they can't get in it, and they can't knock it over quite as easily as a 32-gallon. So there's some advantages to that, but we can certainly look into that. If it's the commission's desire, I can adjust the language to reflect that as an option.
I like that option as well, but you're going to have to make the determination whether their can is conforming or not. I mean, and like you said, it is going to be a little more work up front, but I think it's worth, we want to be conservative and.
We can write that in, and it will be subject to the approval of the Public Works Director that the can conforms to the minimum requirements.
Well, I think you can tighten it up. It has to have a lid, it has to be this type of lid, and it's got to be this number of gallons, and you could, make it so that it conforms, but have some flexibility.
And you might want to put in there that it would only be, for the beginning of the ordinance, change. So, in other words, if somebody's privately purchased can does reach the expiration of its use, then, we don't want to encourage necessarily the citizen to go out and buy a new one from a third-party vendor. It'd be a transition provision, in other words, a grandfathering provision, I guess is the way to put it.
Just something came up today with concern that the garbage can was damaged, which we don't believe it was, but by our crews. So if you buy the cheapest can, it's more likely to be damaged, so that's also a consideration. It would have to be robust enough to take the
Right, that's why it's
mechanism
important to have in there that it's only with your approval.
Okay.
Right.
Commissioners, also, I think at one point we were talking about having a latching lid on them for the transient rentals, if I'm not mistaken, so that if they're out of town and they put it out and it sits there for a few days, at least it has a locking mechanism to keep the lids on, which again would be in favor of us purchasing standardized containers to put out at those facilities.
That is true, and I didn't include that requirement for a latching lid in this just for simplicity, but that would be a difficult thing to
Right.
enforce. So again,
Okay.
it's just something.
How does that work when you lift it up mechanically? How does it unlatch?
Well, the cans have to be manually pulled over to the truck
Oh,
to be
to the
picked
truck,
up.
okay.
So they could unlatch the lid and.
Okay, gotcha.
And let it open. So again, I don't have all the details on that yet. As we implement this, we'll have more detail about the types of cans and such, but.
Okay. Interesting, yeah, all the details.
But it's, yeah.
Who would have
But
known?
so manually, the worker takes the can over, rolls it over, and then it's lifted by the mechanism on the back of the truck and dumped into the bin. So.
Any further
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, actually, on your slide that's up there. The discontinuation of city collection for condos of 6 or more units?
Yes.
How many folks are going to be affected by that currently, current customers?
I don't have an accurate number of the current customers with me tonight. I know that there are at least 5, correct me if I'm wrong, Patty, 5 condos?
The last count that Richard and I did, we're looking at between 10 and 15, maybe 10 total, but I would say no more than 15.
Good. And same question for the discontinuation of services for those generating 10 32-gallon cans per week. And how many customers are affected there?
That I do know the number.
5,
That
6.
was at about 4, based on historic can counts. There were several condos. Was it 15 condos or 15?
The condos were about 10 to 15 that we had that were 6 or less.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the last thing I had was a suggestion for on page 16, section 10-13A, where it says every commercial service premise, including but not limited to hotels and motels. I think it's a good idea to add transient rentals there specifically, since that's a significant change.
Okay, yep, got it.
Any further changes to this draft? Okay. No public comment, so we're ready for, let's see, do we need a title reading? Yeah.
You go ahead and do that now, Mayor.
Yes, please.
Ordinance number 20-05, an ordinance of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Florida relating to garbage and trash, amending the code of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Chapter 10, Garbage and Trash, to amend, revise, and restate the entire Chapter 10 of the city code, and providing an effective date.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 20-05 with the amendments that have been stated, including the insertion of the word "be" on page 8, the correcting on page 12, the labeling of subparagraph E to subparagraph F. On page 16, subparagraph E, striking the reference to the city police department and inserting instead code enforcement. And under section 10-13, subparagraph A on that same page, adding reference to transient rentals in the list of hotels and motels.
Is there a second?
And that's it.
Aren't we going to remove the Article 2 for now, or?
Oh, and removing the reference to the collection and as recommended by the Public Works Director.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Hearing no opposed, the ordinance passes on first reading.
Thank you.
All right, on to new business, personnel manual changes. Beverly, I believe this is you.
Think I'd be here tonight. I'm glad we're moving on. Hello, Commissioners. The first resolution is regarding changing the half-day of Christmas Eve to a full day of Christmas Eve, and also giving Good Friday, the day off for the employees. And the reason for this is to help to keep the, to be honest, we're really below what the normal vacation and holiday pay is. Usually St. Johns County and also the city of St. Augustine, they have at least 12, and I believe St. Johns County has 13 paid holidays. We have 10 and a half. So this would give us 11, actually. So instead of 10 and a half, it'll give us 11. So, when we were off that half day, we only had 1 or 2 calls. Nobody came into the office. They really go by what St. Johns County and the city are doing, because they don't remember that we're our own city, unfortunately. So my suggestion would be that we could add that, and it would be a plus for the employees. But if you have any questions.
I think this is a good idea. I would like to make the recommendation, though, because here's the thing is, when other offices are closed or banks are closed, it kind of hinders any kind of work that you could possibly do, because you can't get in contact with the other businesses or agencies that are closed. So I would propose, though, to follow the state holidays, and I believe that they have one that alternates between
Floating holiday?
one day and another, to give equal coverage for all
Are you saying
faiths and
state or federal?
state.
State.
Right, yeah. I have a list here if you would like that. So it's one year they, I guess, do Yom Kippur, and another year they do a different one. So they alternate one between the other. But since everything is state and we're a city within the state of Florida, it just would make sense to do follow the state calendars, because all of the courts and offices would be closed on the same days. That's my only recommendation.
That Yom Kippur is not a federal holiday, I don't
I
believe.
didn't say federal,
Okay.
state.
Okay,
Follow the state
state.
guidelines.
Follow the
We are a
state.
city
So-
within the state of Florida.
The banks are open then. Okay.
It's still 12 days?
Yes.
And so how is that different from what's being proposed specifically?
This would give New Year's Day, Martin Luther King Day, Monday, January 20th, Good Friday, April 10th, May 25th, Memorial Day, July 3rd or 4th, Independence Day, or 3rd, I guess, as well as the 4th, or when it doesn't fall on a weekend. September 7th, Labor Day, September 28th, Yom Kippur, that's the one that fluctuates. November 11th, Veterans Day, November 26th and 27th, Thanksgiving, and December 24th and 25th, Christmas Day and Christmas Eve.
So President's Day isn't on that list?
Correct.
So that's the difference here is.
Yeah, the original list includes all the federal holidays.
Correct.
And adds the day after Thanksgiving.
Which, yes, and
That's added to the federal holidays, the day after Thanksgiving, and Christmas Eve, a full day.
correct.
And Good Friday would be new, so those would be.
It's just a day and a half.
Adding a day and a half, yeah. And those are probably the most popular days off.
I definitely think that the Christmas Eve makes total sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Just silly that it wasn't previously, really. I mean, for the families, just at preparations. It's a really, really busy time for everyone in their private lives, so.
So it would be really either Yom Kippur or Good Friday?
Correct. Well, I don't have the dates.
You're right, for the state, your state list,
Mayor, if I
Vice
may.
Mayor.
If I may, with the only thing that's good with the state holidays is that our courthouse is closed, our courts are closed, our state attorney's office is closed. Basically, everything we work with in the government is closed, and usually they uniform those. So the only thing it gives on there is flexible religious holidays, which kind of rotate back and forth over the years. So every day the state, when I worked for the state, they post that list, and then based on the only thing that changes is the religious holidays for that year.
Okay.
So again, for us, for law enforcement, we can do nothing when the courts are closed. I shouldn't say us, our administrative staff, when the courts are closed and our state officers are closed, pretty much our criminal part of the element of our administrative staff is closed down.
Okay.
That's the only thing I would recommend, but again, it's hard for us with holidays because we don't shut down, so we continue to operate. It just helps out our 3 administrative staff is all it does.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to doing President's Day instead of the Yom Kippur, which is the fluctuating one. Everything else is the same.
Just a sec.
Okay.
That's my phone, I'm sorry.
All right, well, I'm open to any suggestion here, if you want to keep with the list Beverly has proposed or do something different.
I'm okay with either one. I mean, I don't.
I do know our employees are used to President's Day, and taking it away kind of might make them feel like, okay, well, I don't know when Yom Kippur is.
I definitely would keep the federal holidays.
Okay.
Let's keep federal holidays, and then you wanted to add
Christmas Eve.
the full day on Christmas Eve and
Correct.
Good Friday. So we're down to, is it Good Friday or Yom Kippur?
No, it's, well, yeah.
Which one?
No, Good Friday is already on the state list.
Yeah, but
Yom-
it's not
Yom
on,
Kippur.
it's not on.
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah. It makes sense. The banks are closed, I believe, on President's Day, and
Yes.
Good Friday, I'm sure. That's not religious, right?
No, Good Friday is not a federal holiday.
Religious.
It's
right?
religious, yes.
But I do know a lot of the employees appreciate being off on Good Friday. And I know that the county and the city of St. Augustine are closed on Good Friday.
and the state
We're the only
offices.
ones that's open in this area.
And the state offices are as well.
It seems to me like the concern that Vice Mayor is raising is that we're not disproportionately, recognizing holidays of any particular religion. That's kind of really what and I wouldn't want to have, preclude any employees from being able to take off on Yom Kippur if they needed to. Are accommodations, have they been made? Has this been an issue with our current?
No,
employee
not at all.
workers?
They can take vacation time. I'm trying to get this so that when we hire somebody, we'll have at least the same holidays that everyone else in the area has, so that we're not below standards, so we can keep people.
So the bottom line is 12 holidays, right? Okay,
That's the norm.
all right.
Well, and I hear the concern about removing President's Day when they're used to getting it. That might send the wrong message.
Right.
So I might lean in favor of your recommendations, Beverly. But, I would make sure that every staff member knows that if they're celebrating Yom Kippur, then they've got the opportunity to
Absolutely.
take personal time.
Can we just add that one to it?
Well, that would be adding a 13th day, and I don't think we need to go
No, I don't think we need
that
13.
far. If all employees are receiving pay for 12 holiday days, I'd say that's sufficient. But if they can have, if they have personal days, do they receive a certain number of paid personal days?
No, we don't have any personal days, so they just have vacations and sick and holiday
Okay,
pay. So
okay.
that,
Well, if it poses an issue, if anybody has an issue, I think the commission would probably like to know.
Okay.
So that accommodations are made for everyone of any faith.
Of course, yeah.
And, but if they've got the, you know, the opportunity to take the day off under those other means, I think that's sensitive, given, you know, all the issues in front of us. I'd hate to take away a President's Day from them. So.
federal holiday.
Now, what about the discussion here on subparagraph C? I'm a little nervous about the idea of creating the opportunity of overtime for salaried employees who historically have not received overtime compensation. That gives me quite a bit of concern.
Okay, on this separate emergency evacuation, when we have our declared emergency operation, we didn't have anything in our personnel manual giving us a guideline on what to pay or how not to pay. Right now, we're actually changing one of the things that we had then. We're trying to do the Fair Labor Standards Act, which Fair Standard Laborers Act, that says we have to work the actual 40 hours. We're changing that because people were taking vacation and comp time and still getting paid overtime, and we are changing that so that they have to work the 40 hours. If they do work over 40 hours with a vacation time, then they get straight pay. They don't get anything other than straight pay. But we had nothing, no policy in mind for the emergency operation. When that opens up, how do we pay our employees? It was no actual guideline. So I was trying to make a exhibit that showed exactly what we would do during a declared emergency. And there are certain supervisors, and not department heads, but supervisors that work a long amount of hours during the emergency time, such as Lieutenant Harold and some of the people in the police department as well as Public Works, that they're exempt and they're not getting overtime for just those amount of hours. So I wanted to find out if you would be acceptable to that, where they should get their overtime pay, even though they're exempt employees. And of course, that isn't department heads. That's just supervisors, managers, the assistant of a public works director. It's totally up to you, but I felt that was fair since they were working so many hours during a declared emergency.
Wait, are you talking about subparagraph B or C? I feel like we just kind of crossed categories.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, and it might be me, I'm not sure. You're talking about not department heads. You're saying you wanted to create a mechanism to provide overtime for employees who are not department heads?
Correct. So in other words, we have the Assistant Public Works Director. He's exempt. And so he's out there working during the full emergency, and he's not getting paid any overtime.
Well, if it's, and one way that I was kind of trained is if you're exempt, then you don't get paid overtime.
Right.
And most of the overtime was voluntary. Nobody said to an exempt employee, you have to work.
We can't do that in that situation, though.
You can't use for the emergency, you can't make it mandatory and pay for mandatory overtime.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Because if they're not out there, they can't run the crews. The Lieutenant Harold goes to the EOC. We have, as I mentioned in my information here. I think it was a little over $5,000 that they paid overtime to several employees last emergency operation because we didn't have a clear-cut policy. And that's what I'm trying to give to you so that you'll either make it however you want, but I
But
just...
there has to be a way for exempt employees to curtail or manage overtime that is not necessary. I mean, that is not required. In other words, all managers or exempt employees will work overtime once in a while. So how do you, that's customary and normal for an exempt
Correct.
employee. So how do you define what becomes?
It's only a declared emergency when the EOC is open during the actual crisis.
And their presence is required.
Correct. It's
Okay.
not, it's mandatory that they be there.
Okay, that's where I was kind of heading.
Yeah.
That it's a defined situation and their presence is required.
Which we, that's part of the guidelines, is that it is a requirement that for their job, they have to report. It's just like the police and so forth. But the supervisors and, not department heads, we understand, we don't get that. But when you have, like, under the supervisors, their assistants or the lieutenant or sergeants, police, that have to go out, and even though they're exempt, everyone else is getting paid overtime, and they work just as many hours, and they're mandatory to be there. They just, I feel at that point, for that type of, only that type of incident.
Actually, Mayor and Commissioners, if I can step in here. And there's a couple of things here, and Beverly, I know you spent a lot of work on this, but we have to separate the police department from the rest of City Hall. It's apples and oranges, it truly is. So under the Fair Labor Standards Act, law enforcement, we become, even though we can, some of our employees are exempt right now, which probably don't meet the actual federal requirements for being exempt. Patty and I are going to discuss that with myself and the commander. That's a separate issue. However, it was changed without the knowledge of those employees, which cannot be done technically by law. But that's something we'll fix, maybe just an oversight. But with that being said, so this actually happened 3 times since I've been your chief, and it's Matthew, Irma, and Dorian. That's the only times it's happened. And if we've all spoke about this in the past, where we manage our personnel and send them home as much as we can. But there comes a time when we evacuated all 3 times that we're talking about where our employees can no longer go home. And that includes some of Bill's employees too as well. They just can't go home anymore. We either have to bed down here and call it like it is here, or send them home and not pay them. So again, us with the police department are a little bit different. So with that being said, under the current, the exempt employees kind of become non-exempt. Because they're entitled to overtime if we're forcing them. Our employees don't have a choice. They have to come in and work. They got no choice. The only employees that are given a choice are the ones that have small children, and we tell them to go ahead and take your leave, use your vacation, use your whatever, and you need to go ahead and take care of your family while the rest of us come here and work. So again, that's something we've addressed here. Again, it's happened one time. The 2 lieutenants in question here, Lieutenant Carswell and Lieutenant Harrell, were not paid under Matthew, were not paid under Irma. And then under Dorian, we kind of looked at the Labor Law Standards Act and said, we need to pay them. If we're forcing them to stay here, and I think it was not excessive, I think it was 20 hours or 30 hours, it wasn't that many hours because we continue to send them home. But once we say now you need to live at the police department in one of your offices or live at the EOC to pull shift work, then we've kind of committed to them. Again, it's something that we've juggled internally. We've managed it very, very well over the years because as you know, all of you know, we've never had to ask for money, knock on wood, for any of these hurricanes based on the current budget we have. So again, this is one of those things here that we don't have a union. They trust in you, the 5 of you, to treat them right. We have not had a problem with that. This is not a complaint. Matter of fact, the 2 lieutenants did not want to put in for overtime. It's just something Lee and I sat down saying we have to pay you and not be in violation of the federal law.
Correct.
Lee and I are 2 different beasts. We are exempt employees, as you know. We've never tried to get overtime. We never would. I mean, it's just something that we do for a living. So it's not something that's been abused or trying to be abused.
And with this Exhibit A that we're doing, if we go for FEMA reimbursement, this actually will give the FEMA reimbursement more easily than what we had nothing to go on last time.
That was
So-
one of my next questions.
Yes.
Was, is it I would presume it would be reimbursed.
And I've got like the emergency disaster plan that the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office does. And if it's a declared emergency from the Board of County Commissioners, then certain people are then allowed to get the overtime, which is reimbursed by FEMA.
Correct.
So just so you know, on the FEMA forms 214 and 218 and 219, I believe, 214, 218, in order for FEMA to reimburse us, which they have, knock on wood, 4 times in a row with Hurricane Michael reimbursement, those employees that are non-exempt automatically go to a time and a half as soon as it's declared an emergency.
Correct.
That's the way the FEMA forms.
And that's what this exhibit shows them to do.
One thing I do want to talk about as well, our employees, again, we have to separate the police department. Our employees are on 12-hour shifts, 84-hour work by 2 weeks. So if they take a vacation day in between there for 12 hours, and then they get stuck working a car chase the other night for 6.5 hours, we cannot take that time and a half away from them. We fall under that special exemption where they take their days off are days off, but if they're mandated for overtime, we have mandated them to stay. They cannot leave. If they're in the middle of a case, they cannot leave. So with that, that's why they're paid time and a half. So we got to be exempt from that one too as well. Again, this is not our non-sworn staff. No, this is our sworn staff.
So for normal time, not emergency, if during a 40-hour work week, an employee, there's a holiday or an employee takes a day off, then their normal work week becomes 32 hours. And anything over 32 hours that they're required to stay would be overtime.
No.
No?
Opposite.
No. The opposite. In other words, if it's hours worked, so if they took 8 hours for a vacation day, and then they had to come back and work overtime, then they wouldn't get that overtime. They would just get straight pay, because they didn't actually work, unless they worked over the 8 hours.
Okay.
But they have to work the 40 hours for
Okay.
them to get overtime.
If I can jump in. So federal law states that the work week is 40 hours for standard employees, and that means hours actually worked. So vacation time, sick time, comp time does not constitute hours worked.
Okay.
We, as a city, can do better than federal law, but what we're trying to do is make it more standard so that we no longer allow vacation time to be utilized as hours worked for their
Okay.
days off. They actually have to put in the 40 in order to earn overtime. And as far as the overtime for exempt employees, and as well as defining and tightening up our regulations for paying people to be off administrative leave during a declared disaster. I've been working with FEMA over the past 2 months to try and put the paperwork together for Dorian, and one of the challenges that I've come up against is we paid hourly employees to come in. The city was shut down. We had a need after the storm for employees to start coming back and do cleanup work, taking the shutters down, doing whatever we needed to do to get the city back and operational. But we have no defined regulation in our code book to say administrative leave exists. So they're asking me to show them where we have administrative leave, showing that we're going to pay someone to be off during a declared disaster, so that we can pay those employees who actually went over and above and came back and worked time and a half, so we can get reimbursed for that from FEMA. So the time that we pay them for coming back is reimbursable by FEMA, but we do have to tighten up our policy manual in order to get that reimbursement more readily.
Okay. All right.
So then are we also now talking about item sub A, that
Yes.
you're suggesting that we pay employees when they don't work?
Yes, that has been standard practice.
here?
Yes.
Let me clarify. So Mayor, and let me refresh your memory, so those, not the big meetings we have, but the sidebar meetings we have with usually the county administrator, usually as a county representative from the county commission, the fire chiefs, the police chiefs, the sheriff, that's those side meetings where we, as that executive staff policy review, say, we're going to close the office Monday and Tuesday, because, I don't know, the hurricane is coming on us. So basically what happens is, under the emergency declaration, it doesn't affect the employee. Again, we're exempt from that because our employees still come to work. So what that does is, those employees, we just basically took their days away. They can't do anything besides, we've done it as an executive policy review. So once that state declaration, the county declaration, when we agree in that room, and then we say we're going to close, that's why we're so careful to say, we're closing the office tomorrow. And Max and I are even worse, actually. Max and I keep talking, saying, we're going to keep ours open tomorrow. We kind of go outside the guidelines. If our employees can still get here and we know where they're at, we've maintained the offices open as long as we can outside the entire county. But our responsibility is, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, is if we close the office, and I say we, the executive policy review, all those entities in an emergency, technically we have to pay our staff. 'Cause we-
Right, I understand that. Like,
That's
when
what's
I,
happened in the
when I
past.
worked in Minnesota, if they had a snow day and everything was
That's
closed
correct.
down,
Yes.
you paid your
It's-
employees.
It's out of their control.
Tell you not to
Correct.
come in.
Right,
Yeah, that's all.
right.
I want to say, and Max, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had roughly 2 days in Dorian and 2 days in Irma and 2 days in Matthew, just was the way it worked out, if I'm not mistaken. And actually, I think Matthew was actually one because we closed on a Friday. So it's just, we haven't abused it yet. It's happened 3 times with 3 hurricanes and 3 evacuations.
I guess, not knowing where right in here it is, but reflecting on what I'd seen, my concern was that it wasn't that specific as to a declared emergency. Like, a declared emergency, that's pretty broad, okay? But what you're speaking to, Chief, is more specific, and I'm more comfortable with that.
Sure.
If it's, a mandatory evacuation and the city hall is closed.
Right. Yes,
Right,
I'm
because
just
an
gonna-
emergency can be declared and everybody's still working for the
Right.
next 2 days while we're
Right.
waiting for the hurricane to get
Yeah,
here.
I'm just going to refresh your memory, though, Mayor. What
Okay.
we had to have 2 pieces to the puzzle. The first piece was, we had to have a county declared emergency first
Right.
before we could, as an executive policy review,
Yes.
because then we don't
Yes.
fall into the FEMA reimbursement plan.
Right, of course.
So once we have that county emergency in place, that the storm may hit us, then we have the power to do the next steps, like you said. Yes, ma'am. That's all.
Okay, so Beverly, is it, the language that speaks to this, I just want to make sure that it's narrow so that it's not simply a declared emergency, but it's a declared emergency and then the shutting of the department where the employee works.
Yes, I believe it's in there where it says that it's when it's declared and the EOC is opened. So,
Well, EOC gets opened, though, long before we shut down City Hall.
Okay.
I guess that's my concern.
That's the other piece of the puzzle. The EOC, in order to have a county declare an emergency,
Right.
the EOC is already open. So that
Right.
piece of the puzzle's already gone. We don't care
Right.
about that. We care about the declaration of the county having an emergency, which is already past the EOC being open stage.
so whatever language you would like, it's, I mean, we don't close down unless the city manager, we could put down if the city manager and chief of police advise that it's a declared emergency and, but we do, I'm just trying to get it to the right language that you
Sure,
want.
I'm just trying to see
It's
where we're at.
item
here,
number
too.
2 on page 7.
Okay.
The
I was
city of St. Augustine Beach has suspended normal operations.
Right.
The city manager has closed us down.
Right. Or the chief of police, basically, and they say it's not safe to come in.
The only thing, Mayor, with this and commission is that we decided, the city police department, to stay, remember with the awful tag days. So we made a decision that, Max and I made a decision to close the city departments based on the county and other city. And we closed. I remained open because we were giving out those tags for the mirrors, and our people were waiting to get those. So again, I just wanted to have some autonomy if we decide to, because we have in the past, to stay open as long as our staff is safe and we make that determination to get them back home. But I think we over there have a little bit different duty, especially during evacuations, to provide certain things to our citizens. So I do want that autonomy, that if, just because the county and city closed, Max and I have made decision on other days that, because we saw it kind of move, and our staff could come in, and we allowed them to come in and get a regular workday in and get stuff done.
So what you're telling me is Resolution 20-03 is not quite ready yet?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
We might
That-
need, Mayor, just entertainment moment here, just to kind of follow up on what the chief is saying on that subparagraph too. It might be something like, the city of St. Augustine Beach has suspended normal operations, and the employees supervising department head or the chief of police or the city manager respectively, has,
Sent them home or
dot,
something.
dot, dot. Yeah, exactly, right, so that we give allowance for the, recognizing the two different departments. And then you can work on that, so.
So let's go back to Resolution 20-02 to see if that one is ready for us to approve.
I think that's ready.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay?
Did we take public comment on this?
There is no public comment on this item.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 20-02.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, seeing none opposed, that one passes. And 20-03 will come back to us when you
Change
tighten
the
it up a little
language,
bit.
tighten it up.
So I have a question for you, Beverly. Are you continuing to work on changes within the personnel manual?
Yes, I'm bringing them back every month. I'm going to be bringing, I have it ready, but there's so much. So, and it's been a while because unfortunately, we have so many items. So I'm bringing it back a little bit at a time to change the whole thing.
Okay, so if we
And-
have suggestions or concerns, we should direct them to you? Are you
Absolutely.
kind of spearheading this project?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, item number 10, ordinance 2004. Mr. Law.
That's it.
Yeah, like chugging right along. I feel like a little engine that could.
All right, with the adoption of the comprehensive plan, has given us specific instructions to start amending the land development regulations to implement new policies. So this is as good a spot to start as any. So these are the two sections of the comp plan that tell me to do this. As we shall amend this land development regulations to have protections to preserve the dunes within the city limits. So I basically took section CC 1.2.9, added a couple more words in the proposed ordinance, and wrote, "The city shall not permit nor recommend development that modifies undisturbed areas of the coastal dune system in the city of St. Augustine Beach." Key there is I put in nor recommend, and I inserted coastal to make sure, as everybody knows, Anastasia Beach, especially St. Augustine Beach, Anastasia Island, St. Augustine Beach, have basically fingers of high dunes that go up and down if you look at the aerial topography. This ensures this code doesn't get manipulated to, let's say, a dune in the Anastasia Dunes or something of that magnitude. And this section 5.06 is a creation of a whole new section in the code, so we can continue to modify it. At this time, I have reached out to Fish and Wildlife to ask for any technical assistance so we could add sections as we go, because they represent a different interest, such as the animals, stuff like that, whereas DEP really concentrates, from what we've learned, more on the 100-year storm surge.
Mr. Law, can you speak to the language undisturbed areas? So, in other words, would an area that had been recently modified pursuant to a permit for approving a redesign, would that then be considered an area that was disturbed?
I would say if somebody modified a dune, you could say it's disturbed, but I think the intent of the code is the dunes are, once that modification's done, then at that point, they would be undisturbed at that point. So I do understand what you're saying. I have been thinking about this.
Yeah.
And it's really tricky to try to word this perfectly. So I really want to put out my intent of the comprehensive plan and the land development code is basically no more letters from the city regarding dunes. We now have the teeth we need, and the comprehensive plan is the best available data for my department until we do craft the ordinance and get it adopted.
Should we just remove the word undisturbed?
I can, but like I said, basically what I did is, I think that's a great idea, by the way. I took exactly what the comprehensive plan said and moved it over and
Right.
added the coastal, but I can do that.
Okay.
Well, let me try with the other side.
Okay,
So Sea Colony or other areas that have dunes, they're developed subdivisions. There's dunes on the west side of Beach Boulevard. So those are disturbed. So we wouldn't want this to go that far, right?
Well, I mean, an applicant could come forward with a variance if it's a situation like Sea Colony, when they had to, I know they had quite a lot of dune work a couple of years ago. Wouldn't they be able to come forward with a variance if they showed that there was a particular reason that wasn't going to be simply for aesthetics or simply, to create a higher risk of flooding? So would that address your concern, Mayor?
If I may, before you weigh in, I would agree with Ms. Undine that they would submit an application with an intent to modify a coastal dune. Everybody understands that's the DEP permits required, our flood ordinance supports that, the Florida Building Code supports that. Well, now with the comprehensive plan in place and the future code as we modify and get it adopted, would be an automatic rejection from the Building and Zoning Department. We would reject the applicant's request and deny a zoning verification letter based on a comprehensive plan, followed by the Land Development Code. We'll cite all sections. Then at that point, the variance they could apply for a variance to the Planning and Zoning Board and let the Planning and Zoning Board make the decision. If the applicant was unhappy with that decision, obviously, the appeal of their decision would come to you. Then if they were still unhappy, they could, I guess, appeal it at the circuit court.
There are other areas that are west of A1A Beach that have that dune topography that are in subdivisions next to Hammock Dunes, I believe. Is that the other park there? That subdivision, the name escapes me now. Some of those homes are cut right into the dunes, so it also affects over there. So I just want to throw that out there. There are other areas.
Yeah,
That's
we
why-
don't want, that, we have to be reasonable so that you can put a house, just like we make permission to take down a tree, we've got to have a way to handle a dune that's reasonable for anyone wanting to build a reasonable home.
And keep in mind, that's why I did put in the word coastal dune
Okay.
system as to
I
prohibit
was
the
thinking
westerly.
if we can, is that defined, coastal dune, is that defined?
I would interpret it as I only have one coast, but it doesn't mean we can't create a definition.
So
Now, if we wanna
how
use-
far into the city does this protection
Coastal dune
go?
system, right.
Brian, would you want to tie this into, it's not the coastal construction?
yeah. Okay, I'm going to bring that up. I'm going to just show everybody real fast.
Because I don't know what you can do seaward of that, or what the restrictions are on that.
Well,
but-
keep in mind,
there's
construction
gotta be a
occurs every day
definition in
seaward of the coastal construction control line. All that does is it requires DEP to has to permit it, and then they look. So that blue line you see there, that is the coastal construction control line.
Right, goes
So
through.
we can see all the
plenty.
development. So now maybe we could use the phrase primary frontal dune system, and we could define that.
Or ocean fronting coastal dune system.
Okay,
Dunes east of the coastal control line.
Yeah, coastal dune system immediately adjacent to the, we wouldn't use the high water mark, but the public access. Language is escaping me.
Undisturbed areas of the coastal dune system immediately
Where does the
adjacent to
DEP
the
jurisdiction
Atlantic
kick
Ocean.
in here?
The coastal construction control line.
So they permit everything seaward of that?
Yes, if,
What's your setbacks, where do you establish setbacks for construction along the oceanfront, where the oceanfront homes are, the oceanfront lots?
DEP is going to regulate that, so part of the process is they have to send in a more in-depth site plan showing all the topography, showing what they're proposing to relocate for beach sand, and all that has to stay on site. But DEP actually regulates the position of it. I've seen them turn down a second floor deck that existed just to put a roof over it. And they turned it down because they said it would shed water to the dune. So they look at each one specifically. But I do like the immediately adjacent, and if we want, do we want to say adjacent to the Atlantic Ocean?
Or to the public beach, or the Atlantic Ocean, something of that nature. I mean, you're the one with ultimate interpretation authority.
Right, and my
on it.
interpretation is
Right.
let DEP, because I don't know what happens if I actually reject a zoning verification letter. DEP still is the permit issuing agency. They could just say, I don't think they would do that, but I can't guarantee they won't.
They look to for local ordinances, don't they, for support and help, I would assume?
And I am committed with the Fish and Wildlife. I have sent a request to them, and I know bigger agencies somewhat try to stay out of local, but that doesn't mean I can't ask. So hopefully I get a response tomorrow.
So what is the modified language you have there, Mr. Law?
So right now, after the coastal dune, so the city shall not permit or recommend development that modifies undisturbed areas, which we want to get rid of undisturbed, right?
Right.
Strike that out. Areas of the coastal dune system immediately adjacent to the public beach, is that what we want to go with? That
I think that
seems,
makes sense.
I think that
Pretty
that's
simple.
one option. The other that I heard that I liked was the coastal dune system east of the coastal control line.
I like
I
that
would
too,
be-
but I worry about,
I
some
would be
building lots.
concerned with government taking, at that point, making a rule that, I don't know if I would go that route, but obviously, that's why we're discussing this. But I'd be concerned because you see the amount of properties that do lay seaward of the CCCL. And I really believe the intent is the primary frontal dune system.
Yeah, I mean, if there's an undeveloped lot in Sea Colony or on any of these side streets, arguably, the lot itself is part of the dune system. So,
And keep in mind, some of the sand dunes, the primary dunes, are on private property in this city. It's rather unique.
yeah.
So that gets into a little, like I said, my interpretation of the code that we draft will be, we're not going to provide a zoning verification letter saying it doesn't contravene. We're going to say this directly contravenes the comprehensive plan and the land development regulations once that's adopted. And then they do have the appeal process. They can come through the system, and we'll encourage that with them.
I like that language, immediately adjacent to the public beach, because that's where we really want to protect the dune. And there's dunes all over the rest of the city that we've allowed a reasonable house to be put in there.
Well, I'm sure everybody's seen the new Corral Dental. That's one of those fingers that run through Anastasia Island. Those are all naturally occurring dunes just from probably before people were even here. So that's what I want to make sure that people can't manipulate the code, which is why I thought the word coastal would
Right.
pretty much specify our intent here. So this is what I have. The city shall not permit nor recommend development that modifies areas of the coastal dune system immediately adjacent to the public beach in the city of St. Augustine Beach. And this sets the section so I can keep bringing in stuff as, if I can get Fish and Game to help me out a little bit, and take it from there.
And this will help protect us against further situations like that happened at.
Actually, definitely. This gives us something we can quote. Because keep in mind, with the previous application, I had the flood ordinance, which we adopted, I believe, April of 2018. And at that time, they were in a high-velocity wave action zone. So I went down that road, required full-blown engineering analysis. The statement that it is what it is, that had to be said by an engineer. So they did end up complying. It took them a year and a half to comply. But this now, I can say, your application is being rejected as it contravenes the comprehensive plan, this section and the section of the land development code. Then at that point, they can utilize the appeal process. But right now, your comprehensive plan, you saw fit to adopt last month. I consider that best available information until this is finished.
And if this language has unintended consequences, then you would know because you'd receive an application for a permit and you could bring it to us suggesting a modified language to, if there was a legitimate need for something that.
Yes, ma'am, we would consult with the city attorney
Okay.
when that, if this situation arises. But I'm pretty confident that this demonstrates the intent of the city not to allow resculpting, modifications, whatever word they want to use of our coastal dune system.
Okay, are we ready for public comment?
Yeah. Mr. Eds.
I'm sorry. One other issue I forgot to raise. How, would this in any way impact the nourishment projects?
That is why I've actually reached out to Fish and Game to to see if they could help me a little bit with that, because I did think about that, because we
Right.
have many years left of our ongoing renourishment.
But we could.
Could I put an exception?
For
Right, yeah,
government
with the
work.
exception
For-
of,
yeah.
Government work.
Okay, and just keep it one ongoing sentence, or just, because we may end up doing exceptions
Do we
later,
want
so
to
maybe I can do.
specifically-
Maybe it just say,
Renourishment?
or not recommend private development, or would it be better to write in an exception for
think
government work?
A separate sentence
Okay.
somewhere.
Okay, what I may do, and I'm going to do it right now, and you just have to bear with my pink pen, so sorry.
Nothing wrong with pink ink.
I like it.
Stands out.
So what I'm going to do here is, because we may come up with future exceptions down the road, and we want to not reinvent the wheel with the code. So just forget about immediately adjacent. So I'm going to have A, and this is generally, it's not specific, this is the intent of the city. Right underneath that, I'm going to do a indent over 5 more spots, put exceptions, go back over a couple more spots and put A, alpha, for the exception to all this rule is government renourishments. Maybe we just get rid of government, just say beach renourishments,
I think that's a
in
great
case
idea.
maybe we get a benefactor one day that wants to make a large donation
Yeah,
to restore our beaches.
that'd be great.
And that gives you the ultimate, so if we get more exceptions as they come up, we can just go to Bravo, Charlie, we can just keep moving down the alphabet.
Okay,
Right.
good. I like that.
Would this be first reading?
It can be. I'd like it to be.
Okay, because, and then you could play with.
Yes, ma'am, you'll have it back in what we just discussed exactly,
Right.
and you'll have the exceptions, and then underneath that be another section, alpha, beach renourishments.
Right. I'm wondering if maybe the descriptive language where we'd talked about immediately adjacent to public beach, I guess an exception could be dunes, to the west of the public beach areas, and you could write it as an exception that way as opposed to defining the prohibition of development to the east. I'm just wondering if that would be more
So I could bring in
kinda
a
clean
second
copy.
exception, you said dunes west of the, I could,
For development lots westward of the, I guess no.
my
no,
concern with that is once
no,
again, potentially
Right,
12th
yeah. I
lane
think so,
with the
yeah.
dunes on private property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So I'll get this gussied up a little bit more. When I do this, unfortunately, it's going to go to 2 pages. I tried really hard to keep it all on 1 page for everybody, but I'm out of space.
It's
So
Get it done right.
you'll see this, and then I'll brief the commission if I get any response from the fishing game. I feel pretty optimistic that, I worked with them closely over the last year and a half to try to, stop, but they didn't have the teeth either. So it looks like it's going to start and stop with us to protect them.
Public comment?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Ed Slavin.
Thank you all for doing this. Ed Slavin, box 3084, staugustgreen.com. Very good discussion. Wish we'd done this before Dr. Grimes had gotten his permit, but never again, and thank you very much. One small suggestion, that the commissioners or council or staff contact Dr. Michael Shirley from the Guanatolamato-Matanzas National Estuarine Research Reserve, which one day will be known as the St. Augustine National Historical Park and National Seashore, a lot easier to say. Anyway, Dr. Shirley's number at the GTM NER, his direct dial, his cell number is 904-540-5599, and he's got scientists on staff who'd be happy to help y'all write this or any other ordinance and give you scientific data to use to draft it. I'd be real careful about dealing with the DEP lawyers or people in Tallahassee. As my late friend David Thundershill Quinn used to say, DEP stands for Don't Expect Protection. But Dr. Shirley is an actual scientist who believes in good science, and that's what we need. Thank you.
Okay.
Craig Thompson, but he's left, so.
Okay.
All right, are we ready to at least read the
Read on
ordinance?
first reading. Ordinance number 20-04, an ordinance of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Florida, amending the land development codes of the city as contained within Article 5 relating to resource protection standards, establishing Section 5.0601. It was cut out in my, 00, I'm sorry. It was cut out in my title. Protection of dune system by preventing modifications of undisturbed areas of dune system, providing for severability, providing for codification, and providing for an effective date, And Brian, if you get around to it, the providing for severability, the providing spelled wrong.
Sorry.
So before you advertise it.
Okay, make a motion to approve ordinance number 20-04 with the following amendments. Removing the word undisturbed, adding language defining the coastal dune system as being immediately adjacent to public beach, and identifying exceptions, including nourishment work.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed, that motion passes. All right, we are down to staff comments.
No, we have one thing more. Mr. Wilson's
Oh,
plaque.
yes,
Oh.
yes,
Right,
yes,
right.
absolutely.
Forgot about that. Because it looks like we'll finish the meeting tonight.
I know, how exciting.
It's a parting gift.
I'm ready.
Go down there, get my picture taken or something?
Yes.
I kind of feel like we should all be in the picture this time.
I know, right?
Surrounding him.
Holding captive.
Right?
Mr. Wilson, in
Hold his
utmost
wrist.
appreciation of your 4 years. You're generous and pleasant working with you to give us advice. You have been a good shepherd. So thank you so much for your 4 years of service.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Actually, I'm still going to be working some with Coquina Law Group, so I'm not totally abandoning ship in all ways, but I'm mostly abandoning ship.
We know where to find you.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that was silly.
It's very nice, thank you. This
Well
has
said, Mayor.
been fun. You're a great commissioner to work with. It's been a lot of fun. I can honestly not say that about every place I've worked. But, and this commission works well together. You have no personal disputes with each other. It's just been a real joy. So thank you. It's an honor to work here. And it's also an honor to go out with a win.
Yeah.
This is my first meeting since the MC Suite decision came in, and that was a thrill for me. It was, I really enjoyed doing that, and to go up against big law firms with our little tiny law firm was a lot of fun, and to come out with a successful result was terrific. And it's probably the most, a lot of things I've won in the past, a lot of people don't like. But
sure.
this is different, and it was a lot of fun. I've gotten a lot of positive response from the community. It was clearly the right thing to do, denying them, because overwhelming public response has been, that was terrific. So, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
helping make that happen.
Thank you.
Yes.
And you'll see me around. I'm not going anywhere.
Are you going to come to every meeting and
No.
speak on every item?
You know you want to.
No, I have no opinion on any subject here. No, you won't see me hanging out in meetings.
Yeah, well, just send us an email.
If you have any questions of me ever, you're always welcome to. All of you are my friends as well as my employers, so thank you.
Thank you,
All
Jim.
right. To try and get out of here,
Staff comments.
staff comments. So I shall start with the chief.
Nothing, thank you. Besides my apologies, stepping on my lane with it earlier.
That was good.
Finance.
We have been interviewing for events, PIO coordinators, and we've put an offer, so hopefully everything will work out, and we'll have someone new on staff shortly.
All right. City clerk.
I just wanted to let you know that I'm working on the RFP for all the insurances for the city.
Great.
I have talked to several different insurance agencies, and they have suggested that I split the medical and the property hazard insurances, because if one is higher than the other, I could still pick two different ones. So I will probably go that direction. And we'll end up doing that very shortly.
Would you give them a timetable, Beverly, as to when you'll have it done?
Yes, I can send out the property and risk management one, probably in the next month. And then, July, I will send out in June for the other medical insurance. Unfortunately, they will not accept anything before them because they want to make sure they have enough to quote us.
Okay.
If somebody gets ill right before, they need to know that, and they won't quote before that. So,
Correct.
I will be sending that out in June. We will have an answer by July, and then we will bring it to you by your first budget meeting, coming at the end of July.
Okay. Public Works.
Yes, we did submit for the Land and Water Conservation Program for the Ocean Hammock Park. So that went in. Looking at submitting to the district-wide cost share program for the amount of money over at least a portion of our contribution for the Weir project, Mizell Weir, and hoping to bring the street lighting LED back to you next month. We're still working out a few details about the number of amber lights and the color, be it 3,000 Kelvin or 4,000, different, the 3,000 a little warmer than the 4,000, which is kind of a cooler bluish color. So we're working out some of those details to try to get those straightened out before we bring it back to you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Law.
I'd like to tell the commission that next week, Ms. Jennifer Thompson, one of my employees, is going to Stuart, Florida for the Florida Association Code Enforcement Training in preparations for the future of the city. She will test on Saturday down there, and willing, she will be the first female certified code enforcement officer the city of St. Augustine Beaches had.
That's wonderful. Please wish her good luck from all of us.
She's going to do great.
All right.
She's got to pass her permit tech test, I think, Wednesday, though.
That's good. All right.
And she's in college right now, too. So.
Nice. All right. Max, do you have anything for us or anything I forgot?
Just a clarification on the parking issue that you want to talk about in March. We're not talking about paid parking, are we? Or we're just
No.
talking about parking in general?
The other parking issues that haven't been addressed.
Well, I think if you want something on the agenda, you really need to specify what is it you're looking for so staff can get it done.
I'll get with you, Max.
Okay. All right, perfect.
That was my only inquiry.
That it?
That's it.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we're down to adjournment before the clock runs out on us.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.
Give your books, please.
Nice, we did it.
We have something on the planning and zoning joint.
Sure, they signed that contract.
Yeah,